Okay, Madam Chair, we are recording and broadcasting. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone to the September 23, 2021 Delta Stewardship Council. I'm Susan Tatayan, Chair of the Council, and very glad I'm able to be with you this morning virtually. Let's start with a roll call to establish a quorum, starting with Judge Damrell.
Damrell here.
Virginia Madueño.
Madueño here.
Is Maria Maranian with us? Not yet. Okay, Don Natoli.
Natoli here. Good morning.
Good morning, Christy Smith.
Smith here.
Daniel Zingale.
Zingale here. Good morning.
Good morning, and Susan Tatayan here. We have a quorum. On to agenda item 3, the consent calendar. Council members, one item on the consent calendar this morning. That's adoption of the meeting summary for our last meeting, August 26, 2021 meeting. Are there any public comments on this item?
There are not, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Beck. Members, is there any need for any discussion on the item?
I'd move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Motion to approve and adopt the consent calendar item by Councilmember Zingale, second by Councilmember Smith. If there is no need for discussion or any objection, or do I hear any? Okay, hearing none, the consent calendar item is adopted. On to the chair's report. For the chair's report, our Special Assistant for Planning and Science, Amanda Bowl, will be giving us a preview of the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting, which will take place October 18. Amanda?
Just moving her over 1 second, Madam Chair.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Good morning, Amanda. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, council members. So the fall DPIC meeting is October 18th from 1 to 3 p.m. Throughout 2021, DPIC meetings have focused conversation on ecosystem-based management and how we can be moving toward the simultaneous management of water, land, and organisms in support of an ecosystem that benefits both native biodiversity and human well-being. So for this last meeting of 2021, we will be continuing this discussion with a particular focus on how DPIC agencies can move toward risk-based management and planning for the long-term health of the ecosystem. State Water Resources Control Board Chair Joaquin Esquivel is moderating a panel that will include California Department of Fish and Wildlife Director Chuck Bonham, the Environmental Defense Fund's Maurice Hall, and Department of Interior's Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, Tanya Trujillo. So the meeting is also going to include updates on the science action agenda and Delta Plan for performance measures, as well as a conversation about the creation of a DPIC restoration subcommittee. So as council members may recall, one of the recommendations in the update to Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan, the Ecosystem Amendment, is the creation of a DPIC restoration subcommittee that will begin to work toward reducing barriers to restoration and identifying strategies that we can start to implement to do that. So these barriers include funding and long-term operations and management, among others. So Delta Conservancy Executive Officer Campbell Ingram and Council Planning Director Jeff Henderson will present kind of our initial scoping efforts related to the creation and the formation of the subcommittee. And we're very interested in hearing from the DPIC members their initial thoughts and reactions to really starting to, very proactively move forward on this subcommittee. And then we're also planning to have a short conversation about how and what topics and themes would be helpful to have at the DPIC venue in 2022. So that'll be at the end of the meeting. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Amanda? Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
There is. We have Beatrice Desjardins.
Thank you. I did send a letter to the council about the Delta Independent Science Board. This should also be a concern for the DPIC member agencies because most of them are signatories to the CalFed Record of Decision. All of the state and federal agencies involved in the Delta committed to a program through 2030 with not only a world-class science program, but an independent science board that would be a standing board that would institutionalize rigorous peer review as part of the program. So adequate funding for the Delta Independent Science Board is a concern for all of the agencies that committed to that record of decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Is there any other public comment, Beck?
There's not.
Okay. Well, thank you. Then we'll move on to agenda item 5, public comment on any topic not on the council's agenda. Do we have any comments for item 5, Beck?
We do. Teacher Desjardins had also submitted a request.
Yeah, Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And the Delta lead scientist presented an item on the Delta Independent Science Board budget at the September 16th Delta ISB meeting. And it showed an average, so-called historical average for Delta ISB compensation of $466,000. That's a 33% cut from the original proposed 2020 to 21 contract budget, which would have been a total of about 600,000 for the members and 90,000 for the chair. It was about 75,000 for each member. So we're concerned about a potential cut in hours for the Delta Independent Science Board in fiscal year 21 to 22. We think the Delta Independent Science Board needs more hours, not less, because there's 6 new members and they really need to get up to speed and catch up for the time that was lost over the last year when they had only the $100 per diem compensation. And actually there's 5 new members, but they're all from out of state. They don't they have a lot of expertise on ecosystem management, but they don't have the local knowledge about the Delta, which is very complex. So in response to my clarifying question, Dylan Stern texted that there is no set budget for the Delta Independent Science Board. And respectfully, this needs to be clarified. There needs to be a clear public process, and the Delta Independent Science Board leadership needs to get this information about this is what the proposed compensation budget is for the Delta Independent Science Board, and particularly because the language in the contract says that the Independent Science Board is expected to do the job with the funding that is provided, with the number of contract hours that is provided. So it needs to be driven by an estimate of what the independence and number of hours that the Independent Science Board needs, not by some historical average. That's not a way to do compensation budgeting. None of you are paid on a historical average. and the Delta Independent Science Board shouldn't be either. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deirdre. Is there any other public comment, Beck?
There's not.
Okay, in that case, we will move on to agenda item 6, Executive Officers Report with Jessica Pearson.
Good morning. Good morning, members, and thank you, Chair Tyan. I am pleased to report that on Monday, September 27th, the council will release for review and public comment the draft Program Environmental Impact Report, or the PEIR, for the ecosystem amendment to Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan. The draft PEIR is the result of extensive feedback received from the council, Delta stakeholders, the Delta Independent Science Board, independent peer reviewers, and the public on our preliminary ecosystem amendment that we released in November 2019, first for public review, and then again a revised draft in May 2020. The draft PEIR will be the subject of a public workshop scheduled for our November council meeting. Interested members of the public should check our website for more information, and comments and questions regarding the ecosystem amendment or the PEIR can be directed to the email address ecosystemamendment@deltacouncil.ca.gov. There are currently no active covered action certifications. We did submit a single comment letter last month to the Solano Resource Conservation District on August 27th regarding the initial study and proposed mitigated negative declaration for the Ulatus Creek Habitat Restoration Project. Project seeks to restore 20 acres of riparian woodland on the north bank of Ulatus Creek in Solano County. The letter states that the project could be considered a covered action. It outlines applicable Delta Plan policies and invites the district to meet with the council for early consultation. For any other project updates, please take a look at our monthly active projects report. That and our outreach highlights report are included in your board packet materials monthly. Regarding legislation, we are still awaiting the governor's action on Senate Bill 821, which addresses compensation for the Delta Independent Science Board. If signed, the bill will take effect immediately and the council will begin implementation. Next, I'll quickly preview today's agenda items. First, we'll be asking for approval of a contract with California Sea Grant for our upcoming 2022 class of Delta Science Fellows and our 22-23 class of State Policy Fellows. We'll also hear from some of our current State Policy Fellows on their work over the past year at the council. Next, we'll hear updates from the Delta Water Master, Michael George, on his office's work addressing the ongoing drought. And after that, in line with our role to review and provide advice on regional transportation plans and sustainable community strategies, we'll receive a presentation from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and Association of Bay Area Governments regarding Plan Bay Area 2050, and will request approval to submit a comment letter presenting findings on consistency with the Delta Plan to both organizations. Finally, we will hear from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership on the Estuary Blueprint, which is a sister document to the Delta Plan for the San Francisco Estuary. And lastly, from the Department of Water Resources and Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority, we'll hear an update on the planning for the Delta Conveyance Project. And with that, Chair Tatayan, I conclude my executive officer's report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica, council members? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, Deidre Desjardins.
Okay.
Yes, I just had a question for the executive officer. When you say you're going to commence implementation of SB 821, the contracts that were withdrawn had a specific compensation amount that was approved by the Department of General Services. Have you started that process? And if so, what is the total compensation amount?
My understanding is that 821 sets a new compensation amount that's slightly lower than the Independent Science Board members had made a couple years ago. So that would be the hourly amount. And then the contracts otherwise would look exactly the same as past contracts, other than new dates and new names.
Respectfully, that means the same number of hours in the contracts as in the previous contracts. The same number, the same total, would it be the same total budget of 75,000 per member and 90,000 for the chair?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, so I can't commit to that exact amount, but it's certainly no lower than we've ever done in the past. And we've never had a situation where an independent science board member was limited by their hours in their contract.
By in the past, do you mean average over the past 6 years, or which was the third lower than the original proposed 2021 contracts, or the or the immediate past year original amount?
I'd probably do better to follow up with you offline, Deirdre. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but there's been no lowering of hours or contract amounts other than what would be consistent with 821 should it pass.
Thank you very much.
Any other public comment on this item?
No, there is not.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jessica. On to agenda item 7, the lead scientist report with Dr. Laurel Larson.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, council members. I'm happy to be celebrating my 1-year anniversary of giving the lead scientist report this month. To mark the occasion, I'm going to do something a little different today and start the report with an item other than the article spotlight that I typically start with. Given that there are some relatively new faces on the council, one of our Delta Science Program staff members, Dr. Pascal Gertler, recently took the initiative to develop 2 fact sheets that collectively constitute a Fish 101 for the Delta. Those 2 fact sheets are included as attachments in the staff report, but I'm going to kick off my oral report today by hitting some of the highlights as they nicely lay the foundation for my forthcoming article spotlight. So the 2 fact sheets focus on 2 of the key Native Endangered Species Act listed species in the Delta, Chinook salmon and steelhead trout. It is these species that are referred to under the blanket term of salmonids. Steelhead trout and Chinook salmon have similar life cycles that are described as anadromous, meaning that they complete part of their life cycle in the ocean. They spawn in tributary streams, and after the eggs hatch, the fish spend 1 or 2 years in those streams before migrating through the Delta to the Pacific Ocean. And at the time they're migrating, they are referred to as smolts. They then spend 2 to 5 years in the ocean before returning to their natal streams to spawn, shortly after which they die. The steelhead trout fact sheet goes into some detail on what makes the Central Valley steelhead subpopulation unique. Meanwhile, the Chinook salmon fact sheet details a key danger that Chinook salmon face as smolts passing through the Delta to the ocean, and that danger is predation. Presumably, predation has increased over historical levels due to the introduction of non-native predators, including striped bass, largemouth and smallmouth bass, and white catfish. We know that predation hotspots tend to develop in areas of modified habitat, such as areas with invasive aquatic weeds and in areas of modified flows. However, there has been no systematic effort to delineate these hotspots and quantify overall impacts of predation. It's a topic that continues to come up as a science action in the 2017 to 2021 science action agenda, as a highly ranked potential action and from the workshop for the science action agenda update, and most recently at the collaborative adaptive management team meeting this week. And that brings me to the motivation for the paper that I'm spotlighting this month. And Brandon, if I could go ahead and get the visual abstract up, that would be great. The paper was written by Matthew Nobriga of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and others at the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis. And it was just published in the journal Ecology and Evolution. It uses multiple methods to attempt to quantify predation on Chinook salmon smolts by largemouth bass, which are found in the vegetated margins of the delta, and striped bass, which are found in the deeper water parts of the delta, as they transit through the estuary. As I talk, I'll be referring to this visual summary of the paper that was prepared by Karen Gutierrez, one of our Sea Grant State Fellows. One of the foundations for the paper was the observation that when water temperatures in the delta reach 20 degrees Celsius, which corresponds to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, there's nearly complete mortality of the smolts. This observation is decades old, though. It's from a 1989 study. So the author's first objective was to see whether it still holds given decades of more recent acoustic telemetry data. And the data did affirm that threshold. A second objective was to get at why we see mortality of smolts at these warmer temperatures. Now, it's a basic tenet that organisms' metabolisms speed up with temperature. So one hypothesis has been that predators have a greater need for food when water temperatures are warm, and so they hunt more frequently. On top of that, the authors hypothesized that predation would go up in a multiplicative way at warmer temperatures, given the presence of invasive largemouth bass in those vegetated margins of the delta. So they proposed that encounters with largemouth bass in these areas that were formerly shelters for the smolt would essentially chase the smolt into the open water, where they would then be subject to predation by striped bass, which they would have been less likely to encounter if largemouth bass had not been searching for food in the vegetated regions in the first place. They tested this hypothesis through a combination of 1, field studies using videotape tethered fish at different distances from shore and at different temperatures, and 2, modeling, in which they deduced parameters like fish attack rate and predation success rate by trying to get the best match of the model outputs to the monitoring data. So based on these suites of studies, they first found that there's a small effect of temperature and distance from shore on largemouth bass predation rate, but there's no effect of either variable on striped bass predation rate. Overall, this temperature effect is small enough that it doesn't provide support to the hypothesis that predation rate multiplies at warmer temperatures. And it does not provide a sufficient explanation of why we see extreme mortality at water temperatures greater than 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the model results produced a similar conclusion, but also provided a further clue into what might be going on. Though they showed very little effect of temperature on overall predator attack rate, the only way the model results could match the monitoring data was if the salmon smolt's swimming speed, which governs the success rate of each attack, decreased at those warmer temperatures. This is not something that's seen in captive fish, but the authors hypothesized that it might arise from an increased prevalence of disease at warmer temperatures in the field, or from effects of contaminants during low water, warm periods when those contaminants are highly concentrated. And I will say that the need to study effects of contaminants across the Delta is emerging as a likely priority science action in the drafting of the revised science action agenda. So that study does highlight an important gap. Now, while results on precisely why mortality goes through this temperature-dependent threshold were a little unclear, one thing that was clear from the study was that there is a significant negative relationship between inflows to the Delta and water temperatures in the Delta. In other words, as inflow goes down, temperature goes up. This was important to demonstrate because the common belief has been that flow has very little to do with water temperature in the Delta. And while its impact might indeed be small, managing temperatures through controlling flow might be just sufficient to keep water temperatures below critical thresholds for fish at some places and or at some times. And the study suggested that flows have the greatest relationship to temperature in April, May, and June. Now, to conclude their paper, the authors discussed a handful of management implications. These included active intervention, like what is already being done to truck fish around the delta when water temperatures are not conducive to their survival, along with strategic management of inflows for maintaining suitable temperatures. Flows can also be manipulated to mimic historic flow patterns and trigger smolts to start their migration through the delta early before temperatures get too warm. Last, they stress that any actions that reduce the available habitat for non-native largemouth bass, such as removal of nuisance aquatic weeds or filling of ponded areas through restoration, would likely enhance Chinook salmon survival. So I'd like to pause there and ask if there are any questions either about the 2 fact sheets that I shared with you or about this article spotlight.
Madam Chair, this is Member Natoli.
Don, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Larson. Very interesting. I just wanted to ask, as you were talking about in doing their research, they tethered, I guess it was the bass. How did they do that?
It was the smolt that were tethered. So it was a Chinook salmon smolt. So basically they were looking at whether predation rate by the striped bass or the largemouth bass would vary as a function of where they put the smolt in terms of distance to the edge, and also as a function of temperature. So they ran these experiments at different temperatures. Now they acknowledge that one weakness of this study design is that it doesn't give the smolts a chance to escape, which was a big factor underlying their hypothesis that predation would be multiplicative as temperature goes up, because if the smolts try to get away from a predator in one habitat, they enter the habitat of another predator. So that particular design was not conducive really to testing the extent to which smolt behavior was consistent with that hypothesis.
Fascinating. And when was the research? What was that? Was it just this past spring, or was it over a couple different seasons? Or
so the research took place. I don't know off the top of my head how long what was the duration of the field experiments, but this work also relied on telemetry data that had been collected over multiple decades. It might have been something like 4 decades.
Sure.
But typically the field experiments take place over multiple field seasons where you do see a wide range in temperature.
And just to that question, and so the field research, it was recent, but it may have been over several past recent seasons. Is that I just want to know how current it was, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, I can follow up with you because I don't have those particular experimental details in my mind, but I'm happy to share the paper with you and follow up with you on those details. The paper just came out in the journal a few months ago, so the whole study is quite recent.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much for sharing. I find your presentations interesting, and congratulations on a whole year of doing this. So
thanks. It's hard to believe it's gone this fast.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the question.
Virginia.
Yes, thank you so much. Dr. Larson, again, great presentation. I just had a follow-up question with regard to the invasive plants. So we're seeing a correlation, obviously, with temperatures going up in the Delta. Having served on the Boating and Waterways Commission before, we obviously saw the increase and the invasive water hyacinth that really took over in so many parts of the Delta. Could you elaborate a little bit more? I was trying to follow the connection between, again, some of those plants and how it's having an impact again, along with temperature on the salmon.
Yes, thank you for that clarifying question. So the invasive aquatic weeds essentially create habitat for the largemouth bass, which is a predator that, was not historically in the Delta. And so historically, smolts would frequent areas of native vegetation in the margins of the Delta in order to escape predation by organisms in the open water environment. But now when they go to areas of vegetative cover, those areas are the same ones that are frequented by the bass. And so it basically removes or it decreases the safety of their refugia for them and creates a new source of predation. Does that address your question?
It does. Thank you so much. That definitely clarified what I was asking. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little bit, we're finding that control of those aquatic weeds is really challenging. And that's something that is widely acknowledged. The fact that if we theoretically could control invasive aquatic weeds to a larger extent, it's likely that predation by largemouth bass would go down, but that's something that is very difficult to realize because we don't have a great method for control of aquatic weeds in estuarine environments where you have tides that consistently dilute any chemical treatment you might put in the water.
No, that's absolutely so incredibly true. And I just remember there were such large areas of water hyacinth in the Delta near the port of Stockton that some of the ships were actually detecting it as landmass.
Wow.
So it is absolutely a continued problem that I think we're going to have to become more creative and take a look at other areas, other deltas throughout the world to see how they're taking care of some of these problem invasive species of plants. I think hopefully there's others that maybe have some best practices, but just intrigued by the issue. So thank you again for your clarification.
You're welcome. And what you just said is almost verbatim consistent with some of the draft science actions that have been ranked high that have come out of the science actions workshop. So I think we'll see some science actions on potentially testing experimental controls on invasive aquatic weeds and looking to other systems for some synthesis that might be applicable to the Delta.
Great. Thank you again.
You're welcome. There are no more questions. I will segue to the next part of the report. But before I get into a discussion of Delta Science Program activities, I'd first like to take a few minutes to introduce 2 new data science interns who are working with the Delta Science Program and planning staff. So in line with the Council's commitment to support young professionals to gain experience at the intersection of policy and science, I'm excited to announce that the Council is working with Jewish Vocational Services, or JVS, to place interns within our office to work on Delta-related data and visualization projects in the planning and science divisions. JVS is a nonprofit that has a vocational program which runs a data analysis series that trains people from diverse backgrounds and matches them with capstone experiences or internships. Our partnership with JVS is a pilot program to give the select interns opportunities to work on and learn about our agency and our agency's mission. So please join me in welcoming our current interns, Truk Nguyen and Louis Lechuga. And I don't know if they are here, but if they are, could I have them turn on their cameras and maybe say a quick hello? Brandon, are they actually here?
I don't see them on the
Okay.
attendee.
Okay, well, I am hoping that towards the end of their internship, I can give them an opportunity within the context of this lead scientist report to highlight some of the projects that they've been working on and give them a chance to speak before you all. So I will segue now into our program activities. And as for our past and upcoming activities, there are a few items that I'd like to highlight today. The first that I'm excited to report on is the kickoff of the Environmental Justice Brown Bag Series, which is a part of the ongoing social science integration efforts at the Council, spearheaded by Dr. Jessica Rudnick. The Environmental Justice Brown Bag Series will consist of 4 talks that will focus on water justice, indigenous justice, and environmental justice work in the Delta, and climate justice. The first talk took place on September 8th. State Water Resources Control Board member Laurel Firestone and UCLA scholar Dr. Kristen Dobbin gave an excellent talk on the Human Right to Water Act in California and how it intersects with local, regional, and state water management. Mark your calendars for the next talk on November 3rd at 12 p.m. That talk will focus on Indigenous justice and will feature Dr. Kyle White from the University of Michigan. And he's also on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Later forthcoming talks, as well as information about how to join the talks, are detailed in your informational packet. So one other important date that should be on your radar is October 1st, which is the date of the 2021 State of the Estuary Summit organized by the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Environmental justice is also a focus of that summit, together with community engagement, climate resilience, and other topics. The council's Amanda Bull will be giving some opening remarks, and council staff, including myself, will likely be involved in framing and moderating breakout sessions on a wide range of topics. The agenda is now up on the hyperlink provided in your packet, and the meeting is free, but requires advance registration. So if you're interested in attending any of it, please go ahead and register sooner rather than later. So another important upcoming meeting that doesn't yet have a date and therefore isn't in your packet, but would be good for you to be aware of, is a salinity management workshop that council staff led by Karen Kafitz in the science division is coordinating. Along with a planning committee that consists of individuals from at least 10 different institutions and which includes several social scientists. The meeting will likely take place in winter of 2021. Rather than being focused on the current drought or reinventing previous and ongoing drought synthesis meetings and work groups, this workshop is designed to promote forward-thinking, anticipatory, and collaborative planning for distinct future scenarios. We hope that it will lay a foundation for establishing a firm scientific basis for evaluating the full suite of impacts that salinity management alternatives, some of which are still highly experimental or have yet to be tested, on human communities within and outside the Delta and ecosystems, as well as the ability of agencies to meet their regulatory constraints. Thanks to Councilmember Natoli for helping us identify appropriate participants for the planning committee. And to all of you, stay tuned for more news on this effort. So continuing on, I want to announce that the Delta Lead Scientist Ask Me Anything series will air again on Monday, September 27th. That's this coming Monday at noon. The session kicks off a two-part series focused on upcoming fellowship opportunities for master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral scholars, all of which you will hear about in the next agenda item. I'm excited to co-host Monday's Ask Me Anything with Council Sea Grant State Fellows Jenica Moffitt and Emily Reisner, and we'll be hosting the November 1st session, the second session, with California Sea Grant Science Fellow Denise Colombano, who is starting a postdoc at UC Berkeley. Join us on Instagram Live for one or both of these sessions. And as a reminder, you can access all past sessions on the council's Instagram page. The last one was a really fun session with the council's Dylan Stern and Central Valley Regional Board's Lauren Smitherman, in which we had a detailed discussion about independent peer review and mercury in the Delta. So last, in terms of the by the numbers report in your packet, I will highlight the exceedingly low volumes of water in the 3 reservoirs that we typically report on and in the San Joaquin River, which is flowing at just 24% of its average flow for this time of year. You've probably all been hearing about frighteningly low reservoir levels in the news, and the 3 that we monitor are no exception. Shasta is at 40% of what is normal at this time of year, and that's the highest. Oroville is at 35%, and the San Luis Reservoir is at just 27%. So any questions about any of these items in the lead scientist report?
Sorry. Yes, Chair Tatayan. Dr. You mentioned that there was a session that was held recently with Dr. Laurel Firestone. Is that available where we could watch that since I wasn't able to participate?
That is a good question. Let me follow up with you. I know that I had checked maybe a few days after the talk to see if it was available to send to somebody else, and I didn't see a link, but let me check in and see if that has changed, and I'll follow up with you and send everyone a link if that situation has changed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, council members? I don't have a question, but I want to thank you very much for the fact sheets. I'm a big fan of fact sheets, and these must-know facts are very helpful.
Thank you, Susan. I will pass that on to Pascal, who really took the initiative there.
Yeah, that's fantastic that she thought to do that. On to, well, is there any public comment on this item?
There is Deidre Desjardins.
I also wanted to thank the lead scientist. I think these kind of briefings and conversations are just incredibly important in understanding issues. And I thought the fact sheets were very clear and well thought out. And so it's just amazing science communication. Did want to point out an issue that I raised was concentrations of the Division of Boating and Waterways regularly sprays herbicide in the Delta, and it can concentrate in the Delta sediments. And they found, one of the scientists working on the Delta found that although you can test the ambient concentration and it can be within the tolerances, when there's tidal action and the sediments are stirred up, the concentrations can spike. So, you know, I've always wondered if at low flows, and particularly when DBW is spraying more herbicide, if there isn't a negative feedback cycle, because it isn't washed out as much by tidal action. So I wanted to raise that. The other, I did raise with Dr. Larson at the Delta ISB meeting, a large number of the environmental and fishing groups they work with aren't at the table as much in the, you know, planning sessions for the the Delta Science Program. And one example was the DPIC's Science Funding and Governance Initiative. And there were 3 environmental groups that were invited, but no fishing groups and none of the environmental groups that I work with or us as a science-based advocacy organization. And, you know, the intent of the CalFed Collaborative Science Program was to truly be collaborative. And, you know, I understand the importance of including, you know, the largest voices, but I hope maybe going forward there can be an effort to include more of these, and particularly the fishing groups, because they're so impacted at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. I appreciate that comment. And I will say that there are several efforts underway to try to broaden who is at the table and identify those groups. And just one example that I'll cite is that Dr. Mark LaBelle at UC Davis, in partnership with the Delta Science Program, has a Delta Science Enterprise and Science Governance Survey out right now that is broadly surveying the scientific community and different within agency and interagency groups. And one of the things that he's trying to get at this survey is perceptions of whether key interested parties actually are at the table when these science-based decisions are being made. And so I think we're going to see some really interesting data come out of that survey that will be illuminating. And I will say that there are other efforts underway too, such as some scoping for a seminar on traditional ecological knowledge and trying to engage Indigenous communities to a greater extent than they have been in the past, as just one example. I'm also just going to take this opportunity to say, in response to Virginia's question earlier, that Dr. Jessica Rudnick emailed me, and the video from the past brown bag seminar is available. So I will send a link out to all of the council members.
Any other public comment?
No, Madam Chair, there's not.
Right. Well, Dr. Larson, it's amazing to me that it's already been a year. It's a happy anniversary.
Thank you,
Time
Susan.
goes by so quickly. Oh, Maria.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, what I really enjoyed is the ability of Dr. Larson's to explain this scientific information in a storytelling way, so we
Yes.
all get it.
Yes.
Because this is like serious science, and if you're not a scientist, but you hear it in a different context, you totally figure it out. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that comment. That makes me happy.
Okay, well, let's move on to agenda item 8, consideration and possible approval of a contract with the Regents of the University of California, San Diego, California Sea Grant for the 2022 class of Delta Science Fellows and 2022-2023 classes of State Policy Fellows. Jessica Pearson will kick this off for us.
Thank you, Chair. The council's had a longstanding relationship with California Sea Grant for the selection of fellows who either conduct Delta research at academic institutions or who work in the council's office in support of council priorities. So today I am asking for approval of a contract totaling just over $2 million to continue this partnership for the upcoming classes of fellows. And I will now pass the microphone back to Dr. Larson to provide an overview of the contract and to hear from some of our current fellows.
Thank you. And Brandon, could I get the slides for this? Thanks. So as Jessica Pearson just explained, you're about to vote to approve a contract with California Sea Grant that provides funds in support of the Delta Science and State Policy Fellows Program. These are two distinct programs covered by this contract. Next slide. So I'm going to take a brief opportunity to describe our partnership with Sea Grant and the details and objectives of these two fellows programs. And then I'm going to step aside and allow some of our current fellows to speak on what the experience has meant for them before taking time to address any questions you might have about this contract. Next slide. So California Sea Grant is one of 34 Sea Grant programs nationwide, each of which receives a combination of state and federal support to advance scientific research, education, training, and extension programs geared toward the conservation and practical use of the coasts and estuaries. We have a long history of working with Sea Grant, both in the context of these fellowship programs and outside that context. We work with California Sea Grant, for example, to administer our proposal solicitations and to help us organize both ad hoc peer reviewers and independent peer review panels. This is something they do very well. We have a long-standing partnership with Sea Grant for these distinct fellows programs as well. And since 2003, we have sponsored 107 graduate and postdoctoral Delta Science Fellows and 25 state policy fellows since 2013. Next slide. So I'll take a moment to describe the nature of the Delta Science Fellows program. We offer Delta Science Fellows solicitations every other year, which are staggered with the years on which we offer the proposal solicitation. The Delta Science Fellows program solicitation enables master's students, PhD students, and postdoctoral scholars to put in proposals for work that they would lead, which is immediately responsive to the science action agenda. If they are awarded the funds to complete that research, they remain housed within whatever institution they're affiliated with ordinarily and complete the work. But meanwhile, their hooked up with a network of other Delta Science Fellows that's administered by Sea Grant in partnership with the science program. And it's a really great program that helps them with professional networking and mentorship as well. Particularly, they're matched with community mentors on high priority science actions in the science action agenda. The Delta Science Fellows have historically gone on to be science leaders in the community, either within state government or in academic institutions. Many of them also see later success in our proposal solicitation. And one example is Levi Lewis, who was formerly a Delta Science Fellow, but now a PI who's a recipient of one of our recent funding awards, and he's on the top right. A few research highlights from the Delta Science Fellows program include a new model that can forecast river temperatures in response to stream flow management, increased understanding of fish behavioral responses to stressors that are associated with drought and climate change. Another project involves the use of remote sensing technology to monitor changes in vegetation and restoration sites as a way to assess the longer term impacts of those restoration activities. And then another topic is understanding Delta farmers' decision-making and adoption of soil and water management practices, which was the dissertation of Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who's now housed within the council as our social science Sea Grant Extension Specialist. Next slide, please. So here is Dr. Jessica Rudnick. She was on a Delta Science Fellowship during her PhD from 2017 to 2019. And as part of her dissertation, she interviewed and surveyed Delta farmers on drivers of farm management, decision-making. As part of that, she partnered with the UC Cooperative Extension Delta Crops Advisor, San Joaquin County, and Delta Water Quality and the Delta Water Quality Coalition, as well as Delta County Resource Conservation Districts. Through that project, she developed skills and appreciation for applied research, extension, and outreach, and working with complex socio-ecological challenges. And she cites those things as her motivation to pursue an extension career path and apply for the Delta Stewardship Council California Sea Grant Extension Specialist position, which she now holds. So that's an excellent success story of one of our past Delta Science Fellows. Next slide, please. So I'll segue now into talking about the State Policy Fellows program. This is a program that awards fellowships to recent master's or PhD graduates who are interested in exploring a career path in the public sector at the science policy interface. State Policy Fellows work with council staff in the science and planning divisions for a period of 1 year on high priority tasks. Our current State Policy Fellows are Karen Gutierrez, who works in the Science, Communication, Synthesis, and Decision Support Unit of the Delta Science Program. There's Emily Reisner, who is a fellow in the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit, Jenica Moffett in the Science-Based Adaptive Management Unit, and then Sarah Farnsworth, who is in the Planning and Performance Division. I am now going to turn the stage over to these fellows who will highlight some of their experience, some of the highlights of their experience as fellows to you. And I'll start by introducing Karen Gutierrez, our fellow in the Science, Communication, Synthesis, and Decision Support Unit. So Karen, take it over.
Okay, hi, thank you for that, Dr. Larson. Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Gutierrez, and as Dr. Larson introduced, I'm the fellow at the Science, Communication, Synthesis, and Decision Support Unit. And during my fellowship time, I've primarily been involved in science communication work, which is what initially drew me to this position. So just some examples of the work I've been able to produce so far in my time here are the lead scientist reports, which are presented by Dr. Larson to you all each month. And I also get to create or modify the visual abstract that accompanies each report, such as this image illustrating the importance of phytoplankton in the Delta food web, which was part of my first report back in May of this year. I also get to work on Science Fridays, which are social media posts that are another way to highlight recent scientific work as it relates to the Delta. And with Science Fridays, we have a lot of creative liberty because we get to choose the topics we cover, and the posts are more casual as they are meant to be engaging to a general audience. For example, last Friday's post, I got to write about the native plants of the Delta, which was a really fun writing and learning experience, as I got to familiarize myself with a piece of the Delta environment that is not often highlighted. So those are just some images of like common Delta plants that I chose to feature. And then lastly, I've also been working with Dr. Jessica Rudnick to organize a speaker series happening this fall, focused on environmental justice. And this is part of the ongoing social science integration initiative at the council. And this has been a really exciting and totally different form of science communication, and another project that I am getting to see come to fruition now. So that's been really rewarding. I'm really looking forward to the rest of my time as a fellow and delivering more science communication items, such as for the upcoming State of the Bay Delta Science. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Emily now.
Good morning, council members. My name is Emily Reisner, and I am a fellow in the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit in the Delta Science Program. And I am coming up on my halfway point in my fellowship. And while I've already had many valuable experiences that have strengthened my professional skills and network at the council, I will highlight 3 today. First, I have been able to help with the most recent PSN, where I helped create materials to coordinate proposal reviews, participated in the review and selection of high priority science proposals, and helped to develop public-facing materials to communicate the selections. And I am currently managing several contracts for the funded entities. Through this experience, I have gained familiarity with high priority Delta science, large-scale funding solicitation processes, and contract management while interacting with multiple external partners. Second, I have been able to participate in peer review. So far, I have helped review an IEP science management team research proposal and provide editorial support for the recently completed Mercury control studies review. For the Mercury review, I also helped communicate review findings via information sheets, social media, and graphics, as seen in the schematic in the bottom right of major Mercury sources and processes in the Delta. Through this experience, I have been able to interact with members of collaborative groups such as the IEP science management team and have strengthened my science communication skills. Finally, I have assisted in collaborative science as a fellow with the council. Specifically, I have helped to facilitate the July Science Action Agenda Science Actions Workshop and have provided support during the drafting and prioritization of science actions for the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. In addition, I am currently helping with resources to facilitate the next draft of the Delta Science Plan. This experience has been invaluable for learning about high priority Delta science, large-scale collaborative processes, meeting facilitation best practices, and stakeholder engagement. I have truly enjoyed my time as a fellow at the council, and I'm thrilled that I still have 6 months left in this unique opportunity. And now I'll hand it over to Jenica.
Thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. My name is Jenica Moffett, and I am the current fellow in the Science-Based Adaptive Management Unit, or the SBAM unit with Karen Kafitz. As a fellow in the SBAM unit, I have the opportunity to work closely with the Delta Independent Science Board, which means that in addition to regular meeting support and facilitation with the ISB, I have had the opportunity to support one of their major products, the Monitoring Enterprise Review. I've been working with ISB members in Edmund U to write and edit sections of the report, including synthesizing and incorporating results from efforts that happened before I started, such as a questionnaire and several brown bag seminars. And I have had the opportunity to conduct interviews for the report with heads of agencies and NGOs, which was a great opportunity to get face-to-face time with some of these higher ups. I also work with Chelsea Batavia, also in the SBAM unit, to analyze and synthesize these interviews. And then I also created figures and have been working on accessibility of the entire document. So this one project has been a great multifaceted learning experience for me. And we're very excited because it has been years in the making and we're getting very, very close to completing it. So it will be very gratifying to help get this report across the finish line. I've also been helping to plan a symposium on adapting restoration for a changing climate, which will be happening in early 2022. Not only have I been getting great hands-on experience with all of the nitty-gritty that goes into planning a symposium, but I have also really enjoyed working with and learning from our fantastic planning committee, which has folks from agencies, nonprofits, and academia. And I'm incredibly excited for the symposium because having a committee of people with various backgrounds and insight has led to the planning of what I believe will be a very interesting, unique, and engaging symposium. And then one of my other major projects is helping to support Dylan Chapel, also in the SBM unit, with a restoration synthesis on restoration in the Delta and Sassoon. I have primarily been working on a restoration acreage analysis, compiling metadata on all of the restoration projects and quantifying and summarizing the acreage to date and planned, as well as creating figures and maps for that report. It has been a great crash course in learning about restoration generally in the area, as well as specific restoration projects. And I'm very excited to be supporting what I'm sure will be a meaningful and useful document. So at about halfway through my fellowship year, I have had a lot of exciting and engaging projects and chances to collaborate within and outside of the agency. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of my fellowship. And now I'll pass it on to Sarah to share her experience.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Farnsworth, and I'm the fellow in the Planning and Performance Division. Through my experience at the council so far, which has been nearly 9 months, I have been able to work with the very talented people in my division on a really large variety of projects. One of the most insightful processes I'm involved in is covered actions. I've been able to gain a lot of knowledge about policy and how projects move through the system, from reviewing CEQA submissions every week to pull out any potential covered actions, to assisting with comment letters and reviews through that process. And this also includes helping the team out with any appeals, such as the Lookout Slough appeal from earlier this year. Another project I'm excited about here at the council is Delta Adapts. I've been able to help develop outreach and communication materials for this initiative and assist in finalizing the vulnerability assessment from a couple months ago. And I look forward to assisting with the development of the second phase of this project and developing an adaptation strategy for the Delta region. I've also had a role in developing an environmental justice white paper, which has been a great experience as a young professional wanting to ensure equity and justice across California decision-making. We've been working to review all public comments from over the past decade, and I'm excited to see what conclusions we'll be able to draw from this to inform the paper's creation. I've also been able to work with one of the other fellows, Jenica, on this as well, which has been a great experience. And lastly, while I'm sure there's many more tasks I've been able to get involved in, I'll end with my experience working on the Delta Levees investment strategy. This work has given me great opportunities to strengthen my technical skills, such as ArcGIS, and I've been able to develop informative maps and work on materials that communicate the intricacies of this program. So with that, my time in this fellowship has been a wonderful experience, and I can tell that it's only setting me up for success. So I look forward to my last few months here and what I'll be able to achieve. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you to all of the fellows for excellent and interesting presentations. I now ask you, council members, to approve a new contract with UCSD California Sea Grant in the amount of $2,069,146 for a contract term of November 1st, 2021 through October 31st of 2024. The contract will support the 2022 Delta Science Fellows Program, through which 8 to 10 graduate and postdoctoral researchers will be funded. And the number there depends on the budgets of the proposals that are submitted. And then this contract will also support the 2022 to 2023 classes of state policy fellows, with 4 fellows being housed within the council in 2022 and 5 in 2023. The additional state policy fellow in 2023 will support the interagency ecological program lead scientist, Dr. Steve Culberson. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions about this contract, and thank you for your attention.
Hi, this is Daniel. That was so terrific. I love this project. I'm excited to support it. Could I ask a follow-up question of Sarah?
Just one second.
Hello?
Let me move her back over. One second. Sarah, you should be able to unmute yourself. Sarah, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Sarah. This is Daniel. thank you for your work, especially on the outreach and communications. And I'm excited about the environmental justice white paper that you and another fellow are working on, incorporating public comments. And I just thought it'd be awesome for us to hear from you. What would be your highest hopes for the outcome of a paper like that? Like, what would you, in your wildest dreams, hope that the council and the board and the leadership would how would we act on that environmental justice paper if you can see that far at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's still in its pretty early stages, but based on what we've discussed so far, I mean, one of the biggest things is just making sure everyone is part of the conversation. So when you think of actions, in the Delta that are being taken, ensuring that legacy communities and tribal groups, they all get a say in what's happening. And I feel like the work that we're doing with this paper can help inform, I guess, the best ways to make sure that actually happens. So I would say that's like the main thing that I connect with in terms of this paper, but yeah, it's still pretty early. So I'm sure there's plenty more benefits that'll come with that.
Well, that's a good one. That's a great answer. Thank you. We'll try to live up to that. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that question.
Madam Chair, I don't have a question as much as I do just a comment.
It's done.
Yeah, I just wanted to certainly thank the fellows for their presentations, and certainly what it really brings home for me is the fact that we've got some very, very, very talented and gifted individuals that have, enrolled in both of these programs, both the Delta Science and the State Policy Fellows Program. And I, my takeaway is, one, obviously they are a big part of what goes on, certainly with our professional staff and those that are in the lead positions. But there's not just the support. I think the ideas, the energy, and the effort that they bring, obviously, as part of their ongoing professional development and pursuit of their own careers. But I think that the benefits are maybe even beyond putting down on paper is the talent that they bring and the commitment. And so I just very impressed, certainly by the visuals, by the work, by their support of ongoing efforts to learn and know more about the Delta and some of the impacts that occur there, but also to seek improvement in many different ways. And again, I just was very, very impressed and have been certainly in my term here on the council with the ongoing work of folks that are involved in various policy and science research, investigation, but also I think the outcomes that are potentially affected by their good work. So I just I thank them, thank Dr. Larson and all the folks, Dr. Rudnick as well. So thanks.
Madam Chair, I have one question. I
yes,
just for Dr. Larson. So the cost of 2 million and some change covers all the labor plus additional research cost, right? What would be the big line items in a research, let's say?
So typically, the big line item, and I presume you're asking about the Science Fellows Program budget.
Correct.
So graduate student stipends and tuition is typically the biggest.
So tuition and stipend. So tuition is the big. So the labor comes in form of the tuition. Hey, instead of them being paid, it's their tuition being paid.
Well, I'm lumping tuition and stipend together because that's basically the cost of keeping a graduate student in active status each semester. Yeah.
So it's that, and then
it's really dependent on the individual project. So some of these projects will involve the cost of sample analysis. Some of them will involve the cost of transportation to the field to complete the work. Some of them include conference funding.
Sure. And
So,
this budget is for the 4 that presented plus whatever comes within that year.
so the 4 that presented, so those are the state policy fellows, plus 8 to 10 science fellows, and those science fellowships have a duration of 2 years each.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm clear and I'm ready to make a motion to approve if there is no more discussions.
Well, I think Virginia had her hand raised. Hi, Virginia.
Hi, Dr. Larson. Just kudos on the selection of these amazing, young, talented scientists, Emily, Sarah, Karen, and Jenica. Curious to see where they're from. Are some of them from the local area? Just curious. And 2, how do we highlight their work in whether it be in our state media or in their communities, local communities where they come from? I think that their work should be highlighted. I think that they should be recognized, and I think that they should be used as a tool to try to generate, again, more interest, especially from young people here in the Valley, to see these wonderful opportunities that exist in exploring more and doing more for our Delta. So I threw a lot at you. So.
Well, I really like the suggestion. Thank you. Thank you so much for those suggestions. We've been thinking about how the science program could be more engaged in outreach, particularly to the local community. And I like what you're proposing. I will say that there are several ways in which we do highlight their work now, including through social media. Our communications division is really good at providing them with recognition and opportunities to get their work out there via social media. But I agree that there are a range of ways that this work could be highlighted, and there is more that we could do in terms of outreach. In terms of where our fellows come from, a lot of them do come from the state of California, but not necessarily the Central Valley area. We also see applicants from out of state as well. So it's really a wide range of places that our fellows are coming from.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, is there any other council discussion?
Does the motion that I believe Patricia made require a second?
Yes.
I will second the motion, and I can't help but comment on the superb work that the fellows do on our behalf, and it's just remarkable. And I would like the notion of providing a little more story about the individual fellows. I think that's a story that needs to be told. In any event, I second the motion enthusiastically.
Great. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is not.
Okay. Well, then we have a motion by Councilmember Moranian to approve the contracts, a second by Judge Frank Damrell. Let's proceed with the vote, starting with Judge Damrell.
Aye.
Virginia Medueno.
Medueno, aye.
Maria Moranian.
Moranian, aye.
Don Natoli.
Totally aye.
Christy Smith.
Smith, aye.
Daniel Zingale.
Zingale, aye.
And Susan Tatayan, aye. The contract, approval of the new contract is effective. And I just want to chime in full agreement with the other council members that this is amazing, outstanding, energetic talent that brings such an inspiring, fresh perspective. And I think we learn as much from them as they do on the job. On to agenda item 9, Delta Water Master Michael Patrick George. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here this morning. Brandon, maybe you could put up the slides that I'll be using. But I have to say, though, I'm happy to be here to give my regular quarterly report of what we're doing in the Office of Delta Watermaster. It's always intimidating to follow Dr. Larson, but I thought it was unfair for her to bring the additional 4 big guns to kind of outshine the your old broken down Delta Watermaster. Nonetheless, impressive group. I've had the pleasure to work with some of the fellows and some of their predecessors, and it's exciting, and I'm just pleased to have the support that they bring to all our efforts in the Delta. So let's go to the next slide. There are really 5 things that I'd like to discuss with you today. Obviously, the kind of headline is the drought emergency regulation and the responses to the crippling drought that we are currently experiencing and which we risk continuing into the ensuing water year and beyond. Secondly, and somewhat related to that, we are involved in an investigation of complaint alleging unlawful water diversion within the Delta. And I'd like to bring the council up to date on where we are with that. I want to also give you the update on the efforts to develop a predictable dry year response to water shortages in the Delta, and do that in the midst of this item number 4, which is how we approach the risk of the continuing drought in the water year, which will start next week. And finally, I hope to end on a pretty positive note about the imminent rollout of OpenET and how that's going to turbocharge our efforts to understand water use within the Delta. Brandon, next slide, please. So starting with the first kind of headline here about the drought emergency regulations, obviously the governor adopted and then expanded the proclamation of a drought emergency, and using authority granted in that proclamation, the board adopted emergency regulations to address drought in the Delta watershed on August 3rd. Subsequently, it went to the Office of Administrative Law for review and was approved and became effective on August 19th. The very next day, the Division of Water Rights issued orders of curtailment and reporting to all water rights in the Delta, some 17,000 individual water rights, maybe 8,000 individual holders. All of those orders went out by regular mail and for the first time applied the revised water unavailability methodology that has been developed by the division, building on what the division and the water board had to work with in the last drought, 2015-2016, refining the methodology, improving the data inputs, and dramatically improving the ability to visualize on a watershed, sub-watershed, and area basis the difference between water supply and demand throughout the Delta watershed. It's a really important improvement in the data management and methodology that supports the board and the division's action with respect to managing in a drought where there is more demand than there is supply in the system. So turning to how this impacts specifically the legal Delta, kind of in my swim lane as Delta Watermaster, and obviously the focus of attention for the council. So all water right holders and claimants are required under the reporting portions of the order to certify their compliance. And that's important because we ask all water users to agree and understand and to sign up for electronic notifications going forward. Obviously, in a developing a dynamic drought condition, it's too slow to have to send out snail mail to do merge letters and all that stuff, as the division had to do for the orders that were issued on August 20th. So the first thing that the certifications indicate is that all these water right holders sign up either to a LIRIS email list through which they'll get updates on a periodic basis, or their agreement to frequently review the website where updates are posted as they happen at least once a week, and that has tended to be posted on Thursday. So we'll see a new post on all this this week. So that's a really important development in terms of allowing the Water Board, the Division of Water Rights, the Office of the Delta Water Master to provide fresh information. That's going to be particularly important as we move into the new water year, because obviously we hope for rain and precipitation that we need to manage on a more dynamic basis by informing water users of when water is available, when it's not available, at what priorities, etc. Third point here within the Delta is that all licenses, basically the authority to divert and use water within the Delta watershed that were granted after the Water Commission came into existence in 1914, all of those have been curtailed because in this drought, they are so junior that they need to be curtailed to preserve water for more senior water rights holders. In addition, within the Delta, pre-1914, a select number of pre-1914 water rights were curtailed, and really those are the ones that have the most impact. And there are only two of them in the Delta. That is a water right that was granted or was perfected prior to 1914, and that claim is junior enough to be curtailed and is not supported by any other water right, whether it's a riparian right or a supply contract. So there are only, as I say, two of them that are important. They're Byron Bethany Irrigation District and Banna-Carbona Irrigation District toward the southern part of the Delta, where they divert under their pre-14 rights. And much of that water is does not return directly, or the tailwater does not return directly to the Delta. It mostly returns through the lower San Joaquin River. In any case, working with them ahead of time, we wanted no surprises on this. So they were prepared for the order that came out on the 20th, and both entities immediately complied with that order, which, as I say, was expected. They planned for it. And it only lasted for 11 days because it was applying the methodology only made curtailments necessary for the month of August. So between the time the order was issued on the 20th and the end of August on the 31st, both of those very large diverters completely curtailed, stopped diverting under their pre-14 water rights. In September, the methodology allowed those curtailments to be lifted, and obviously it's the end of the irrigation season in any case. So the important part of that is, number one, they complied. Number two, they received information on an electronic basis for the regular updates. And although they disagree with and have challenged the board's authority, they complied. They're working with us to try and recognize that aside from the regulatory issue of curtailments, the real issue here is physical lack of water because of the drought. And finally, a point here, riparian rights in the Delta have not so far been curtailed because the way the methodology operates doesn't support a curtailment finding. Now, having said all this has happened and is ongoing, and we'll get information probably as early as tomorrow as to what happens in October, and it'll be dynamic going forward. Notwithstanding all that has happened since the governor's proclamation and the adoption of these regulations, as you would expect, challenges have ensued. The Water Board has been petitioned to reconsider the adoption of the regulations and to reconsider the orders that were issued under it. In addition, challenges have been filed directly with the courts, asking the courts to intervene in what complainants have indicated they believe is an excess of exercise of authority by the water board. So that's a snapshot. Things have been moving quickly. There's been a lot of activity throughout the Delta watershed as we come to the end of the current water year. I'll stop there just for a moment in case there are questions, and then move on to the investigation that we're conducting into complaints of unlawful use in the Delta. Okay, so Brandon, can I have the next slide about that investigation? First of all, the complaint was filed on June 10th by the Defiant Water Authority, alleging that there were unlawful diversions in the Delta. That complaint was joined fairly quickly thereafter by additional export representatives, including Westlands Water District, the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, and the state water contractors. And as a result of that complaint, the Office of the Delta Water Master and the Division of Water Rights have joined forces to collaborate on managing an investigation of this complaint. That investigation is ongoing. I'd summarize the complaint by saying, essentially, it's a mass balance estimate of depletions of water within the Delta. What I mean by that is the complaint looked at sources of water coming into the Delta, outflow from the Delta, and exports from the Delta, and said the difference between the inflows and those outflows are a mass balance estimate of depletions that happen within the Delta. And on the basis of that, they claim that there must be within those depletions some unlawful diversions. And the aim of the complaint, obviously, is to induce the Office of the Delta Water Master and the Division of Water Rights to discipline those alleged unlawful diversions so as to protect releases of previously stored water by the projects. Now, it's important to focus on the fact that riparian diversion, which, as I just said, are not in the Delta. The methodology does not currently support curtailing those riparian rights in the Delta, but there is an allegation embedded in this mass balance analysis that some of the water diverted by riparians is outside their ability to access because it's not natural flow. It is natural flow augmented by a frankly hard to quantify amount of previously stored water. And it is that protection of the previously stored water that the complaint aims at. And obviously these exporters claim injury because of the depletion of storage. But I think it is important to note that they are not demanding that the unlawful diversions be stopped for the purpose of expanding exports. So even these complainants who are export dependent recognize how serious the water shortage is and recognize that if there are unlawful diversions in the Delta, those unlawful diversions being stopped or curtailed or reduced should go to protection of the Delta, not to exports from the Delta. Next slide, please. So where are we in this investigation? First of all, the Division of Water Rights and our office decided that it was important to involve the complainants in our investigatory process, to have it be open, transparent, and available so that we're sharing data and understanding as we pursue this investigation. So the first technical thing that we're doing is trying to refine that mass balance analysis to get a better sense of the quantification of the inflows, the outflows, and to recognize that there will always be a range of uncertainty in those estimates, but to see if we can do a better job of quantifying that range of uncertainty to get a better handle on this mass balance analysis. embedded in that is also to differentiate the sources. How do you determine the difference between previously stored water coming into the delta that should go to outflow or in delta use or export, and other water that's available in the delta, whether it's return flows, whether it's natural flow, etc. So that's one big element, is trying to refine that mass balance analysis, but recognizing that once it's as good as it can be, not perfect, but within ranges of uncertainty, then to disaggregate what's in that mass balance analysis of depletion. In other words, recognizing that water is used in the delta, how do we disaggregate it from kind of a monolithic amount of depletion and figure out what its constituent parts are? Because we know that there is a lot of evaporation from open water in the delta. There are thousands of acres of open water, out of which there is naturally occurring evaporation. Secondly, there is evapotranspiration that is not managed in any way. It's riparian vegetation and aquatic vegetation. And of course, we recognize that aquatic vegetation, particularly invasive weeds and particularly hyacinth, evapotranspire a great deal of fresh water from the delta. And we don't yet have a good handle on that, although there's research and work going on in that area, which we think is going to be important to us in the future. And finally, we get down to the portion of water depletion in the delta that is managed, and that is water that is diverted from the delta, which goes to support crop evapotranspiration. So disaggregating the depletions, we then say, okay, focus on the managed portion of the depletions, that goes to crop ET. And the first thing we need to do is evaluate the alternative supplies that are available to support those crop ETs. The biggest, most important of those in the delta is the water supply and water quality contract between the North Delta Water Agency and the Department of Water Resources. That is, as I say, an alternative supply which supports the ET, or the diversion and use of water for crop ET in the northern part of the delta, which is more than a third, less than a half of the irrigated acreage in the delta. There are some other water supply contracts that we're also looking at, so as to focus our attention in this investigation on the quantities of potential savings that are available and how those savings might be applied if indeed they are determined to be unlawful. Working through that process with the technical team from the Division of Water Rights, our office, as well as the complainants, we're getting focused on what the data are, what the information is on which we can make additional determinations. But as always, that will get us to some pretty thorny embedded legal issues, which we have not yet started to address. That will be another phase of this investigation. So that's kind of where we are on this. And I would say that this is going on a parallel track with the development of plans for predictable dry year responses in future dry years, including the water year that's about to start a week from tomorrow, when the new water year begins on October 1st. So, Brandon, if I can have the next slide, this is kind of on a parallel track based on dry conditions early in this year. The boards of the 3 Delta water agencies, the North, Central, and South Delta water agencies, directed their staffs to work together to develop a dry year response program, and asked the Office of Delta Water Master to convene that group for the planning exercise. So since February, we have been meeting on a regular basis with the general managers or designated representatives of each of the 3 water agencies and a small group of their trusted advisors to develop a dry year response program to basically recognize that a drought, although it becomes an emergency, is a predictable event, which is better managed through a predictable program of management as compared to an ad hoc emergency response. And that with drought planning, you get predictability, and with emergency response, you have to suffer through a great deal of uncertainty. So that was the objective of these discussions. As a result of this, these water agency general managers and their advisors, as well as me as Delta Water Master, reported back to those boards at each of their monthly meetings since February about where the group was moving, what we were finding, what kind of recommendations we had, so as to maintain a close connection between the planning group, represented primarily by the general managers, and the board members who represent water users throughout the Delta. And through that monthly check-in, check-back, these water managers have continued to have the support and understanding of their broader water boards, and it has created a dialogue within the broader Delta water use community that has resulted in a proposed program that, number one, is aimed at presenting a unified voice for the Delta that nonetheless recognizes, even though the voice is unified, that there are different regional constraints and opportunities within the Delta. So recognizing those regional differences, but trying to speak on a unified basis so that there can be engagement about what's going on generally with water use in the Delta. Second major element is to recognize that opportunities for responding to future drought conditions must be voluntary at the water user level, because the Delta water agencies do not own the water rights, their constituents do. So the water agencies in this program would be facilitators, not direct actors. The actors would be the owners and claimants of the underlying water rights. With these kind of general background issues, the three components that have come out of this process are a suite of potential water conservation actions that are different in different parts of the Delta to recognize these regional differences. Secondly, to recognize that within the Delta, water shortage is not, or drought is not experienced as physical water shortage, but rather as risk to water quality. So the second of the three components, the three legs of the stool, if you will, are what can be done to protect water quality and to avoid salinity intrusion or other degradation of water quality that are components of drought throughout the watershed. And finally, and importantly, third leg of the stool is improvements in data. So that again, as we're planning, as we're looking at what alternatives are available, we're all working from a better, more coherent, shared data set. So with these developments, this group began a series of meetings with state agencies and their representatives to talk about how this collaborative drought planning process could be put in place to increase predictability for inevitable future water shortages. Those discussions have been extremely useful. The next in the series is going to take place next Monday between a team from the Delta and a team from the state to work on developing this program. And we're currently engaged in developing a pilot for the coming water year beginning the end of next week. Next slide, please. And the reason that we're looking at 2022 as a pilot for this process is that we obviously face a very significant risk of continued drought into water year 2022. Our reservoir storage has been seriously depleted over the last years. The picture behind this slide is a recent picture of Folsom Reservoir, but you could take pictures of any other reservoirs along the foothill rim of the valley, and you would see similarly dramatic depletions of those reservoirs. In fact, we will go into the new water year next week with dangerously depleted storage that threaten this delicate balance between demands on our water supply and the extreme variability of that supply and the inherent threats to both ecosystem function and water supply uses or demands on the delta. And because of the reduced supply in the rim reservoirs, the risk that there may not be sufficient freshwater net outflow to hold bay salinity out in the bay, and the risk, as I talked about earlier, of intrusion of salt into the interior delta. Next slide, please. As a result of this risk, I have kind of informally started to think about this mantra in the delta: pray for rain, plan for drought, but be prepared for floods. Do what we can to reverse the subsidence that increases those risks. Restore the ecosystem as we can so that it can function better through dry periods. Always tend to the levees, because without the levees, we lose control of the system. Beware of climate change, which threatens all of this to go on steroids. And finally, to protect the water rights, not only in the Delta and in the Delta watershed, but the water rights that serve all of California, its people, its ecosystem, its economy, the sociology, all of those things that are critical and central in the Delta. Next slide, please, Brandon. So I said I want to end on an up note, and the up note is OpenET. We've talked about this in quarterly reports in the past, and I'm very pleased to say that OpenET is going to roll out with the new water year a week from Friday, October 10th. There'll be a media release. We have been for months part of the beta testing process, and I'm really excited about how OpenET has matured and developed through the collaborative process for science. And so once we have the public rollout of OpenET, we will be able to use it through Google Earth Engine to drive the Delta Alternative Compliance Plan, which importantly is going to give us, for the first time, I mean, it's weird to say in 2021 that we don't have a GIS connection, a geo-referenced connection between points of diversion. We know where the points of diversion are, but we don't have the connection between them and a geo-referenced place of use. And that's partly because some of these places of use were determined, as early as the middle to end of the 19th century. So we didn't have GIS mapping. We didn't have computer digitized georeferencing capabilities. We're getting that for the first time through the Delta ACP. All water users in the Delta who want to take advantage of the Delta Alternative Compliance Plan will come as participants with a GIS indication of their place of use. So we'll have the user saying, that's my point of diversion, and this is the place of use which is served. That's going to allow us to gain a great deal more insight. And the next point here of consistent, credible, transparent, accessible to anybody, timely insight on actual water use in the Delta. And I would say that it is a leap of faith and confidence by the Delta water users to recognize that transparent information on how they actually manage this precious water supply is going to be important, not only to their management decision, but to our regulatory decisions and to informing others who care about how the Delta operates to know what's actually happening on the Delta in much closer to real time. This allows us to leapfrog the current system of inconsistent and inaccurate collection of data reported on an annual basis after the fact where it's not really actionable. And it will allow us to continue and to improve the research into correlations between actual diversions and crop water ET. So this will come into effect because OpenET will now be a publicly available resource. We're going to roll this Delta ACP out for the new water year beginning October 1st. So Happy New Year to all of us. It will be applicable to that water year, and therefore we'll get the first reports of water use under this new system in February of 2023. And why do I say February of 2023? Because just a week or two ago, as the legislature finished its work, it approved a trailer bill, SB 155, which had in it important developments that we have talked about before, and we've supported. The division and the Austin Delta Water Master put this forward to consolidate all water use reporting in not just in the Delta, not just in the Delta watershed, but throughout California to the water year. So we're going to report all water use for a consistent water year, rather than what we've got now is a mishmash of some calendar year, some water year, some what's called a delivery year. All of them are going to be consolidated to the water year. And secondly, because they're all going to be consolidated the water year, we're going to get all the reports on February 1st of the ensuing year, much earlier than we've had that information in the past, much more accurate, much more consistent, allowing for much more collaboration among different modeling efforts, among different reporting efforts, et cetera. So this really is a big breakthrough, a big leapfrog, and the high point on which I want to end a miserable water year in 2021 with hope for improvements in the water year that we're about to enter into. So that's the end of my report on a Happy New Year note.
Thank you, Michael. Council members, any questions? Virginia, I see your hand raised. Was that your hand, Virginia?
No, but thank you. I'll take the opportunity if that's okay. Michael, just want to commend you for an excellent report. I'm intrigued by the work that you do, and it just brings to fruition how much work we all collectively have to do. And just want to recognize again your enthusiasm, and although it's dire and it continues to look even more dire in the future years, I just I want to thank you for number one, for your degree of knowledge, professionalism, and how you highlight what is going to be very much necessary in the coming years. So thank you.
Thank you.
Maria.
Yeah, there was a slide that had a number of items, including the reverse subsidence. Can we go back to that slide for a second? I have a question there.
Sure, I think that was the slide, Brandon, that had the Delta mantra, maybe?
Yes.
That's the one you meant?
That's it, yeah. On reverse subsidence, could you shed some light on that, of in what conditions we, or expecting, how do you see that?
So obviously, you and the other council members are well aware that the highly organic soils in the central part of the Delta are subject to subsidence, not the way subsidence happens, let's say, in the Central Valley through overpumping of groundwater. Rather, it is through oxidation of those organic soils. So one of the ways to reverse subsidence, which has been the subject of a lot of pilot testing and so forth, is to deprive that organic soil of the oxygen necessary to oxidize the soils, that is saturated at all times. So there are two major ways that are emerging to do that. One is the Department of Water Resources on Twitchell Island has a large multi-year project which has demonstrated that by keeping the soil saturated you can regenerate essentially tules, the natural circumstance of the delta before reclamation, and that by stopping the subsidence through depriving those organic soils of the oxygen necessary for oxidation of the soils, and by the natural decomposition of the annual crop of tules, you can actually begin to stop subsidence and begin to rebuild it. Now, that's a long-term process, and it's not possible throughout the Delta. That's one promising way of reducing subsidence and thereby reduce the impact or the pressure on our Delta levees, because obviously the subsidence behind those levees lowers the land level, you increase the hydraulic pressure on the outside of the levee. The other major way is to grow a different crop, and primarily that means rice. And so there is an effort now to increase the irrigated acreage in the Delta that is devoted to rice, because again, you flood the area, you deprive that organic soil of oxygen. It's important to note that these efforts to reverse subsidence are in opposition, or it's a trade-off with reducing water use, because both managed wetlands, growing tules or other things, or increasing riparian habitat, or cultivating rice where in prior years maybe you grew corn or tomatoes, actually increases overall water use, particularly in the short term. So how you proceed on these two issues, reverse subsidence and managed drought, are in a tension which we have to manage. So that's why reversing subsidence is among the mantra issues.
Yeah, thanks. And that's what I thought. I mean, the whole concept of reverse subsidence, I mean, the cost of it and how, and what does it mean in the context of the Delta and, more water use at a time that you're trying to curtail and all that, it's going to be a challenge. And that's why I asked of how viable it would be, and how would it be in the order of the agenda and on the short run, knowing what we know right now. Thank you for the explanation.
And also I would say that particularly with respect to rice cultivation, there is a good deal of ability to manage when the water is used. And so it may be possible in certain circumstances, particularly because of relatively higher temperatures in the Delta, it may be possible to do flooding and release of water at times that are actually beneficial to managing in a drought. To flood when you've got water and avoid use of that water, because once the rice breaks through the water surface, it actually shades that water and reduces evaporation. So there's some pretty sophisticated work going on, some pretty impressive pilot projects throughout the central part of the Delta. And I want to give a shout out to Campbell Ingram and the Delta Conservancy, which has really led this work and helped to get grant funding and so forth to promote the experiments that are necessary to figure out how we're going to manage the tension between subsidence reversal and water use.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any
I have
other
a question for
Oh, yes, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, thank you again for a characteristically informative, interesting report. I particularly appreciate the optimism. And one I want you to elaborate a little bit on. If I understood you correctly, the water exporters who are alleging the illegal diversions, I think you said, are not asking that those illegal diversions be added to the exports, but that actually be applied to protection. And I'm just like to bet a little deeper sense from you of how much of a departure is that? How much optimism can we take from that in terms of a broader understanding that we're all in this together? Or is it more of it's a zero-sum game in terms of the water anyway. Can you just go a little deeper on that, please?
I'd be happy to. So what I said was that this particular complaint is not aimed at increasing exports this year during the period of time that the complaint has been outstanding. So the complaint was filed in June, kind of at the beginning of the irrigation season. But at that point, the Bryant Water Authority and the other exporters recognized that because of the extreme drought, reducing diversions in the Delta was not going to result in the ability to export more water, but it would protect water in storage from needing to be released to meet those alleged unlawful diversions. I don't want to suggest that everybody's singing Kumbaya here, because this is water rights in California. It's never Kumbaya. It's always a contest, because there is a certain amount of water. There is a priority system for allocating that water in times of shortage, and so I would not say that the exporters in their complaint are forswearing reducing unlawful diversions that are alleged in the Delta, so that in future periods they could be the beneficiaries of increased exports. I think it is, however, Daniel, a recognition by everybody that, unlike how we came out of the 2015 drought, where there was a lot of grousing, frankly, about the regulatory drought, there's nobody who is focusing on what's actually happening in the system who misses the point that regardless of the regulatory environment, the physical environment is such that there may not be enough water in storage if 2022 is a dry water year to maintain a sufficient net freshwater outflow to hold salinity at bay. And that the risk is a physical risk to the Delta of salt intrusion, which would interfere with everything that we rely upon in a functioning freshwater estuary. So it is the recognition of the extreme risk that we face because our reservoirs are so depleted. If there's not a wet year that gives us a great deal more natural freshwater outflow, so if we get another 2020 or another 2021 on top of it in 2022, the risk is there's just not enough water in the system to repel salt, and that we could lose the functioning freshwater estuary through salinity intrusion. And it is that wolf at the door that I would say has united everybody in recognizing that protecting as much storage as we can going into an uncertain year is that unifying factor. It's why the Delta water agencies are saying we don't experience drought as a lack of physical water. We experience it as a risk to water quality. So that's really, I think, the dynamic that's going on here, Daniel.
Thank you so much for your insights on that. I think that is progress. Thank you.
Any other questions for Michael? Okay. Is there any public comment?
There is Deidre Desjardins.
Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. I just wanted to thank you for your excellent work. This data work is just so critical. I did look at the hydrology of the data in the last drought, and there was a mystery about where the missing water in the Delta went. And one other key component was, at that time, was the accuracy of DWR's method for estimating exports from Clifton Court Forebay. At that time, they were just using estimates from cycling the pumps on and off. I went and looked and it appears that they put like good calibrated flow meters. So we now have good data. Is that the case?
Well, Deirdre, it is the case that the quality of the data kind of all around has improved dramatically since 2015. Part of that driven obviously by Trailer Bill SB 88 of 2015, which required measurement of all diversions in the Delta. Now, we're a long way from full implementation of that. And, you know, we've taken a temporary side path through the Delta Alternative Compliance Plan to get more actionable, more accurate, more critical data. But we haven't given up on measurement, and we continue to work with the large diverters in the Delta, particularly the Department of Water Resources, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Metropolitan Water District, some of the large irrigation districts, Reclamation District 999, Reclamation District 2068, Banta Carbona, Byron Bethany. So we've made a lot of progress in improving all of our data sources. And I think just as importantly, in integrating those data sources so that they're machine readable, they've got common periods, measurement methods, the metadata is protected, preserved, so that smart people like you, Deirdre, with California Water Resource, can dive into that data and get a lot more insight out of it. And I think that's one of the big things. And I again go back to Dr. Larson's effort and the fellows' effort to synthesize the data we've got. We've done a lot to improve that data. We are now really focused on synthesizing it so that it's transparent, readily available early, maybe as estimates subject to correction, but so that we've got information that people can share to then describe alternatives and opportunities for managing more intelligently based on a common set of commonly accepted and understood data.
Could I just clarify? Because it did occur to me that at least the 2015 method of measurement by DWR could have errors at low diversion rates if they're using pump cycling on and off where there's low head. So has that been replaced with actual flow meters, or do you know?
No, it hasn't been replaced. And obviously throughout the course of the summer, the projects have been on extraordinarily low diversion from the Delta. Frankly, so low, as you say, that they've, through the Coordinated Operations Agreement, they've operated only one or sometimes two pumps. Now, the pumps at the federal project don't have variable speed. They're on or off. So they've been operating for most of the summer at the federal pumps at the smallest of those pumps, which is about 800 CFS. At the state project, they've got variable speed pumps and they have used them to augment that. But for much of the summer, the total exports from both Banks and Jones, both the state and federal projects, has been certainly under 1500 CFS, which is was the regulatory limit for most of the summer. Generally, they've been at 1100 or even lower than that. So frankly, that has meant that the project's diversions are at the lowest practical level to maintain operations. And that has meant that unlike in other periods where if there were risks to the Delta, you could dial back exports. Exports have been dialed back all throughout the summer. So we don't have any more notches on that dial to manage the Delta. And again, that's one of the reasons why the complaint did not request increases to exports. Those exports have been at bare minimums pretty much throughout the summer, but they are still measured essentially by the pump efficiency and time in use.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on this item, Beck?
We do. We have Matt Conover. You should be able to unmute yourself, Matt.
Hello, I'm from John McCormick Company down by Twin Cities Road, Lost Slough area in Reclamation District 1002 at the headwaters of McKelmy in the northeast corner of the Delta near I-5, where the Cosumnes River comes in. Concerned about all these dams and open reservoir ET losses, and suggest that you should be inventing some kind of technology to float on top of those open lakes in order to stop it mechanically from evaporating into the atmosphere, some kind of floating pool cover kind of concept. And I know that storms will drop down onto that, but maybe they could be on rollers removed off to one side or hauled by boats. And then once the reservoir is full again, covered up so that summer heat doesn't evaporate everything out of there. Maybe have huge savings on ET. Then I had a second question about the status of your spy in the sky comment I saw somewhere on the internet about you being able to monitor evapotranspiration and other crop use from satellites now.
So the article you're referring to was published online by Circle of Blue. And I can tell you that I didn't have any control over the headline that called it a spy in the sky. But I'm glad you asked the question, because I think there is concern, not so much in the Delta, where I think the Delta water agencies and many of their water users have been involved in the development of Open ET all along. But in the broader farming community, the concern with accurate, open data on water use might be misused by regulators or others that are inimical to agricultural water use. On the one hand, I think that very clearly would be a misuse of the data. I think it, on the other hand, is important to recognize we're dealing with a public resource, water. It's the finite and critical resource in our entire economy and ecosystem. So the notion of being able to keep tabs on it and to understand where water is actually being used is positive for a reasoned dialogue about the use and allocation of this most precious resource. So I feel a little bit like the old line, the truth, you can't handle the truth. I think we can handle the truth, and we're eager to have the truth so that we can make better decisions than making decisions on misunderstandings or oversimplifications of water use. And so, yeah, the Circle of Blue article had the headline "Spy in the Sky." The interview and the burden of that article was about the use of technology to understand better how our ecosystem, our agricultural water use, our urban water use, how our understanding of that is evolving through improved data and technology. And yeah, I think it was unfortunate that Circle of Blue or some editor somewhere decided to jazz up his story describing eye in the sky. I also would say that article in the lead paragraph described me as a garrulous talker, which I know none of you would believe for a moment.
You're doing good. Nice depth of technical info. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment, Beck?
No, that's it, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you, Michael. I agree. You're doing good. You're it really truly is amazing, your depth and breadth of knowledge. And I want to thank you for sharing it with us and keeping us up to date on these items. I'm really eager to see the outcomes of the dry year response program and the open ET. It's
Good.
it's
Thank you.
amazing
And
work.
I'll be back in a quarter to tell you how we're progressing on that.
In the meantime, I'll recite your mantra daily. Thanks.
Thank you.
So on to agenda item 10, Metropolitan Transportation Commission Association of Bay Area Governments draft plan. Oh, for Virginia. Sorry, I didn't see you.
Oh, yes, Madam Chair, I'm actually going to recuse myself from this item due to my previous work being related and tied to Valley Link. So with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and excuse myself. And because we're virtual, so what I'll do is I will sign off and then I'll wait for Brandon to send me a text and then I'll log on as soon as this item is over, if that's okay.
Great. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you.
So the draft plan Bay Area 2050 proposed comment letter, our Deputy Executive Officer for Planning and Performance, Jeff Henderson, will tell us what this is about.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Jeff.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Pleased to be here to present this this item for your consideration this morning. Let's go ahead and advance the next slide, Brandon. So we're here this morning to consider the council's responsibility to provide timely advice with regard to local and regional planning agencies and the consistency of the plans that they prepare with the Delta plan. And this applies to local agency general plans, but it also, in kind of the biggest application of this is to sustainable community strategies that are prepared by long-range regional land use planning agencies to guide regional transportation planning and funding and their greenhouse gas reduction approaches. And these documents are referred to as sustainable community strategies, or SCSs, and they are typically prepared by metropolitan planning organizations or regional councils of governments. And in our review, the council's input on these documents concerns consistency with the ecosystem restoration needs of the Delta and whether the lands set aside for natural resource protection in those sustainable community strategies are sufficient to meet the Delta's ecosystem needs. And this is all set forth by Water Code section 85212. Next slide, please. The Delta Reform Act requires that an MPO that's preparing a regional transportation plan that includes land within the primary zone or the secondary zone of the Delta requires those agencies to consult with the council early in the planning process regarding issues and policy choices related to the council's advice on the matters that I'd summarized on the previous slide. And for reference, there are 3 MPOs that have jurisdiction within the legal Delta and Sassoon Marsh: MTC ABAG, who we'll hear from today, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG, and the San Joaquin Council of Governments, or SJCOG. Federal and state laws require these agencies to prepare regional transportation plans, and the state requires preparation of a sustainable community strategy that must be updated every 4 years in coordination with each member local government of these agencies and cover at least a 20-year planning horizon. Council last addressed the SACOG RTP SCS in 2019. Council at that time submitted a comment letter in support of SACOG's 2019 plan and its consistency with the Delta plan, which the council approved in October of 2019. Staff is currently working with SJCOG on a 2022 update to their RTP SCS, and we've been meeting with them to discuss Delta plan consistency requirements. And MTC ABAG's RTP SCS, which is named Plan Bay Area, is the subject of today's presentation. and their adoption hearing is scheduled for next month. Next slide, please. ABAG made the draft Plan Bay Area 2050 available to the council on June 3rd of 2021, including concurrent notice in the same manner in which agencies file a certificate of consistency pursuant to Water Code Section 85225, and this is in line with those requirements. Preliminary findings as to the consistency of the current draft of Plan Bay Area 2050 were offered by staff in a comment letter submitted to MTC ABAG on July 20th of this year. And that letter indicated that those are preliminary findings subject to consideration and potential modification or approval by the council at today's meeting. Next slide, please. So this is important, firstly, because consultation on regional plans is required by the Delta Reform Act, but also because the Reform Act exempts actions within the secondary zone of the Delta that an MPO determines are consistent with a sustainable community strategy that the State Air Resources Board in turn has determined would achieve the regional greenhouse gas reduction goals. Such proposed actions, so if a future action is essentially consistent with a sustainable community strategy, that future action is not a covered action regulated by the council per the definition of covered action offered in the Water Code. The map on this slide illustrates that there is land within the secondary zone in the jurisdiction of each of the three MPOs. Plan Bay Area 2050 includes the land in the secondary zone that is shown in blue, dark blue, primarily in Contra Costa County. So since future projects in this area may be exempt from the council's covered actions process, it's important for the council to ensure that the RTPSCS itself is consistent with the Delta Plan. And we conducted consultation on Plan Bay Area 2050 with MTC ABAG beginning in December of 2019, working through January of 2020. We issued a comment letter on proposed growth geographies that you'll hear a bit about in the MTC ABAG presentation in February of 2020. MTC ABAG offered a response to those comments in April of 2020. And then in October 28th, 2020, we submitted a comment letter on the NOP. And in July of 2021, a comment letter on draft Plan Bay Area 2050 and the draft EIR. So next slide, please. With that, I would like to invite Dave Vaughton from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, who's joined us this morning to present the agency's background and preliminary approach and findings for Plan Bay Area 2050. So we'll turn it over to Dave. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Vaughton with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments. I'm the Assistant Director of Major Plans, and happy to be here to share a bit on Plan Bay Area 2050. First, I did just want to thank the staff of the council for their ongoing coordination early and throughout the process, which was much appreciated. And, really excited to be here to share what we believe is a more comprehensive regional plan for the Bay Area. It's not your traditional RTP-SCS, has new elements for economic development and environmental resilience, which were not previously included, and is really striving to be more of a comprehensive vision for the San Francisco Bay Area, all 9 counties and 101 cities, as opposed to a more transportation-oriented plan like past iterations. If we could go to the next slide. So I'll just give a quick overview of what Plan Bay Area 2050 is, and then talk about several strategies that seem particularly relevant to the Delta. So first of all, this graphic here shows the 4-year planning process we've undertaken that kicked off in early 2018. Efforts in 2018 and 19 focus on exploring 3 divergent futures for the Bay Area, with uncertain forces driving the narrative to understand how strategies could make the Bay Area more resilient and equitable in the years ahead. And on the environmental front, a lot of this involved exploring sea level rise for the first time, looking at different potential futures in terms of how the nation and globe may tackle climate change and what it means for San Francisco Bay and our coastline. Moving into the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, the Horizon Initiative recommended specific strategies to prioritize, and those fed into our blueprint, which is really a package of strategies, 25 in the draft, 35 in the final, and ultimately the final blueprint was advanced into the environmental process. We released the draft DIR, as was mentioned, and the draft plan itself in May of 2021. There was a public comment period throughout the summer, and we are looking forward to releasing the final plan and final EIR in early October. Next slide. So as was mentioned, this is a long-range plan, 30-year plan, focused on trying to make the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. And again, it's about connecting the dots between transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment, trying to look at the suite of strategies that advance a broad range of goals, and looking at the intersection of a lot of these concepts, as that graphic shows. Next slide. The plan does look geographically at the Bay Area, and we do try to focus the vast majority of future growth in what we call growth geographies. Now, traditionally, these were locally nominated places called priority development areas. As we look to the future, looking at our housing needs in the region, we realized that those areas could not accommodate the full spectrum of housing needs for the region without creating significant displacement pressures. And so in this iteration of Plan Bay Area for the first time, we've really looked at a broader suite of geographies, again, to focus growth. So we're growing within existing urban growth boundaries. We're avoiding unmitigated high hazard areas. But at the same time, we're looking at some additional places and jurisdictions that haven't stepped up to the plate, looking at state identified transit-rich areas, as well as high resource areas, places with great schools and great access to parks and jobs as key locations for future growth. And the map on the right really shows where those areas are in the region. They account for roughly 4 out of 5 new homes going forward. Next slide zooms in a little bit onto the Delta region of the Bay Area. So apologies, a little fuzzy here, but you can see over there on the bottom of the slide, northern and eastern Contra Costa County, where there are several priority development areas, also some priority production areas, which are intended for real focus on jobs, particularly industrial jobs going forward. And you can see to the north there some additional growth areas in places in Solano County as well. Next slide. So again, all of these locations are within existing adopted urban growth boundaries. This is one of the key strategies in the plan, is not to sprawl out further, but to focus future growth almost entirely within those existing boundaries. The growth pattern in the plan, as shown on the left, really focuses the vast majority of growth in our 2 largest job centers, Silicon Valley and the San Francisco, Oakland area. You can see that there is some more limited growth in Solano County, as well as some housing growth in Contra Costa County as well, accounting for roughly 1 out of 8 new homes there. And there's some statistics shown in the bottom left there, really highlighting, again, the focus on housing near transit, the focus in these growth geographies overall and in our larger cities. Similar story for jobs. You'll notice that, again, Silicon Valley and the San Francisco, Oakland area account for the bulk of future new growth in terms of jobs, but also some meaningful job growth in Solano County, as shown, and Contra Costa County. So it's really about trying to find a good balance between housing and jobs throughout the region, while focusing growth in places that are going to help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions and, importantly, advance our equity goals. Next slide. But of course, the geographies are just a piece of the puzzle. If you just identify where growth will be occurring, but you don't think what sort of public policies could be implemented on the local, county, regional, or state levels to do so, then you're really not solving the challenge at hand. And so that's where the strategies that are at the core of the plan advance the objectives of Plan Bay Area. You can see the 11 strategies here. really spanning the spectrum from transportation in terms of maintaining our existing systems, investing in bike ped facilities, building $100 billion next generation transit network, kind of a wide range of transportation investments, but also new strategies on the housing front where we're looking at a multi-$100 billion investment in affordable housing preservation and production, new strategies in the economic front to try to better balance jobs and housing locations and to close the stubborn income inequality gap in the region. And then, of course, where we'll focus today is that bottom right, where you can see 3 themes and 9 strategies within those that focus on the environment. And those include strategies to reduce the risk from hazards, not just sea level rise and flooding, but also earthquakes and wildfires and other sorts of challenges the region faces. Expanding access to parks and open space, which is, again, these are all new strategies to Plan Bay Area 2050 to look at how we can make sure that we address park inequities and access to green space. And finally, strategies designed to reduce climate emissions. Next slide. Again, just for time, I'll breeze through this slide, but if the plan is implemented by local, regional, and state agencies, we could bring the cost of living in the Bay Area down to much closer to the national average, as opposed to the extreme levels that we've experienced for decades here. You get 1 out of 5 commuters out of their cars into alternative greener modes. We can provide much more affordable housing in historically exclusionary communities, meet the state's greenhouse gas target, protect 98% of homes from sea level rise impacts through a $19 billion set of improvements along our shoreline, and improve jobs housing balance in counties throughout the region. So we're really looking across the gamut at a whole lot of different public policy issues. Next slide. And of course, these 30-year strategies do need to translate into near-term actions. And that's why we have developed an implementation plan of over 80 specific near-term actions that align with those 35 strategies. For each strategy, we're not saying that we would be leading them all. In many cases, it's going to require deep partnership with other public, private, and nonprofit entities in order to overcome gaps that might exist in authority, financial resources, technical capacity, or public and political support. So I'd point you to that for some more information on some of the direct actions we'll be taking as an agency to implement this plan should it be adopted next month. Next slide. Of course, all long-range plans in California have to produce an environmental impact report. The draft environmental impact report was released in early June and discloses a range of potential environmental effects, mitigation measures, and studied several alternatives to the draft plan. It's a programmatic document reflecting the impacts of all those strategies on the region's future. Next slide. So I'm going to zoom in on actually more than 2 environmental strategies just to really focus on how this plan is different than other regional plans in California, and I think has a greater synergy with the work that the council is doing. Next slide. So first of all, one of the new things in Plan Bay Area 2050 is instead of assuming that sea level rise is just an environmental impact that affects our plan, we've taken proactive measures through new strategies to tackle the challenge of sea level rise throughout the Bay and the coastal regions. This includes investments in things like marshland restoration, ecotone levees, and elevation of highways and rail lines along vulnerable shorelines. Total cost over the next 30 years to protect our communities would be roughly $19 billion. And here's what we would get out of that investment. We'd be able to protect 89,000 homes in the region and 166,000 job locations. We'd also be able to build 100,000 new acres of, 100,000 acres of marsh adaptation and also restoration investments. And all major highway and rail corridors, facilities ranging from Interstate 80 to SR 37, US 101, major facilities in our region, we would be able to protect from flooding. Next slide. In the near term, we have some specific actions that as an organization, we plan on advancing. This includes work in FY22 through our Bay Area Regional Collaborative Regional Climate Adaptation Legislative Working Group. That's a bit of a mouthful. But really that's about working with our partners in the Bay Area in order to define roles and responsibilities for sea level rise planning, funding, and implementation. There's a lot of agencies involved in this space and really figuring out what activities each agency is best positioned to advance. Our agency is also going to be taking the lead on a sea level rise funding plan. This effort's going to explore more on the shorelines of our region, how we can continue to refine the types of projects that might be invested in, and also to explore revenue sources that could be used to fund that $19 billion proposal. Next slide. Strategies in the environmental element also look at how we can maintain urban growth boundaries, conserve and maintain our natural and agricultural lands, and as I mentioned before, invest in parks, trails, and open spaces to deal with some of those serious inequities in terms of access to parks. These strategies would help us increase open space by roughly 25% per person in the region. We'd be able to improve our fire resilience by limiting development in the wild and urban interface, and we'd be able to yield some significant ecosystem benefits and carbon sequestration benefits. Next slide. In the near term, we do anticipate playing a larger advocacy role on the preservation of those urban growth boundaries throughout the Bay Area to ensure that that strategy is being fully implemented. Next slide. And we will be leading a revamp of the priority conservation area planning framework to use a more data-driven approach to refine the locations that are top priorities for conservation in the 9-county region. And we look forward to working with the council and many other environmental stakeholders on this important effort that will kick off in 2022. Next slide. And in the parks and trails and recreational facilities space, we anticipate not only weaving that into our work on the priority conservation area revamp, but also increasing our legislative advocacy to seek new revenues for these important purposes. Next slide. So what's next for Plan Bay Area 2050 and regional planning in the San Francisco Bay Area? Next slide. Well, there's a lot going on this slide here. We have a very busy next month as leading up to the proposed adoption meeting on October 21st. We expect the final Plan Bay Area 2050 and the final EIR will be released no later than the week of October 4th. And that will include final proposals for how we'll be implementing the plan, and of course, the environmental analysis and response. We'll be holding a series of stakeholder and public presentations the week of October 4th and the week of October 11th. And our committees will consider adoption of the plan first at the committee level on October 8th, and then with a full evening meeting of the commission and the ABAG Executive Board on October 21st. Of course, that's not the final step in our long-range planning process. We then submit the plan for federal and state approvals in the fall and winter. And key agencies there include the California Air Resources Board and many of our partners in the transportation space. But most importantly, we're looking forward to pivoting after 4 years of planning to create this brand new vision that weaves in the environment more than ever before towards implementing that vision. And while there are a series of initiatives already underway, the efforts that I mentioned today, many of them will kick off in early 2022. Next slide. So thanks for the opportunity to share Plan Bay Area 2050 with you all today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. And actually, if I could ask Chair Tatayan if we could postpone questions to the end of the presentation, just in the interest of time.
Certainly.
We could do that. So Avery Livingood from our staff is now going to summarize quick review of our assessment of draft Plan Bay Area 2050 and its alignment with the Delta Plan.
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, council members. I'll try to make this quick. So as Dave mentioned earlier, Plan Bay Area identifies 4 different types of growth geographies where the plan attempts to focus future urban development. And staff reviewed the proposed growth geographies for consistency with 2 Delta Plan policies, DPP1 and ERP3. Delta Plan Policy DPP1 limits new residential, commercial, and industrial development within the Delta to areas that are either within the Contra Costa urban limit line or areas that were designated for urban development in local general plans as of 2013. So thanks to MTC's policy of locating future growth within established urban growth boundaries and the Contra Costa urban limit line, all of the proposed growth geographies are consistent with DPP1. Delta Plan Policy ERP3 requires that projects avoid or mitigate significant impacts to the opportunity to restore habitat within 6 priority habitat restoration areas designated within the Delta. No growth geographies are proposed within a priority habitat restoration area. Therefore, the draft plan appears to be consistent with ERP3 as well. Next slide, please. We also used the Delta Plan's priority habitat restoration areas to assess whether the land set aside for natural resource protection by Plan Bay Area are sufficient to meet the Delta's ecosystem needs. There are 2 existing priority conservation areas in East Contra Costa County, which includes the Western Delta Priority Habitat Restoration Area, and this would carry forward in the 2050 plan. Plan Bay Area 2050 includes a newly nominated priority conservation area in Cache Slough, which is consistent with the Cache Slough Priority Habitat Restoration Area. Sassoon Marsh is not designated as a priority conservation area in Plan Bay Area. However, Sassoon Marsh is already protected under state law and under state and local regulations. Therefore, staff found that the land set aside for conservation and restoration appears sufficient for the ecosystem restoration needs of the Delta. Next slide, please. So as Jeff already mentioned, staff submitted a comment letter with our preliminary findings on the draft plan in July. The letter noted that the preliminary findings would be considered by the council at today's meeting. And should the council approve the findings, staff will transmit an updated version of the letter to MTC ABAG, attesting to the council's action and including any revisions approved by council members. So for the benefit of those on the phone, I'll read out the summary of preliminary findings. Based on review of Draft Plan Bay Area 2050 and the draft EIR, in compliance with the Delta Reform Act, Section 85212, the council has not identified any inconsistency of Draft Plan Bay Area 2050 with Delta Plan Policy DPP1, and the council has not identified that land set aside for conservation and restoration in Draft Plan Bay Area 2050 are inconsistent with the ecosystem restoration needs of the Delta. So I think now we can take questions, or if the council just wants to move forward with considering the preliminary findings.
Council members, any questions for any of the presenters? Okay, hearing none. I just want to say that this is an amazing planning process that Dave, that your organizations have carried out. I imagine that it took thousands of hours, and thank you for coordinating with our staff and taking to heart the Delta Plan. So council members, do I hear a motion to approve the preliminary findings documented in the July 2021 so motion by Judge Frank
I
Damrow,
second it. I totally second.
second by Don Natoli. Is there any public comment on this item?
There is. First, we have Deidre Desjardins.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the Plan Bay Area staff. This is one of the most critical tasks. I did want to point out that there's an ice sheet model intercomparison team for the IPCC 6 and for the couple model project, and they found that the mass loss in Greenland actual observed is twice that predicted by the ensemble mean. So our models just aren't capturing how fast the polar ice sheets are melting, and they don't really know why, but it points to it being incredibly important to have the Bay Area protected for 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050. So I think this is just absolutely critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deirdre. Any other public comment?
Yes, we also have Matt Conover. Matt, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, I used to be a planning director, and I was involved with coastal management plan. The oil industry in Alaska got in there, and the mining industry, and disabled the planning program altogether. There were still other laws involved, and economic development has moved forward and created a lot of jobs up there, including for the native corporations. I see a lot of regulatory controls imposed here, but I don't see anything about economic development creating jobs. Is there a planned component there? I saw the word, but I didn't hear anything about it. Thank you.
I'm certainly happy to answer that question if that's the chair's preference.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you for the question. Today I focused on just a handful of the environmental strategies because for the sake of time, but there's a whole economic development element to this plan. So there are 6 specific strategies, job training programs, business incubator strategies. There are efforts to really look at the location of jobs and encourage new job clusters in housing-rich parts of the Bay Area that might have lesser access to jobs and tackle some of the inequities in the economic space. So I definitely encourage the commenter to take a look at the economy chapter of Plan Bay Area 2050 that really, again, it's all about connecting the dots between these topics of infrastructure and housing, economic development, and environmental policies.
Thank you.
Any other public comment?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, then let's proceed with the vote, starting with Judge Damrell.
Damrell, aye.
Maria Moranian.
Moranian, aye.
Don Natoli.
Natoli, aye.
Christy Smith.
Smith, aye.
Daniel Zingali.
Zingali, aye.
And Susan Tatayan, aye. Thank you to the presenters and the item to approve the preliminary findings in the July 2021 comment letter is approved. On to agenda item 11, San Francisco Estuary Partnerships Estuary Blueprint. And let's get some context from Amanda Bull.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and hello again, council members. So I'm pleased to welcome to the council San Francisco Estuary Partnerships Executive Director Caitlin Sweeney, who's going to provide a brief overview of SFEP and the Estuary Blueprint. As Jessica Pearson mentioned earlier, the Estuary Blueprint and the Delta Plan can be considered sister documents, and as such, our 2 organizations collaborate and communicate often. As part of this coordination, and in addition to the programmatic support the council contributes to SFEP, which is referenced in the staff report, the council has a seat on SFEP's implementation committee, and I currently serve as the vice chair. So with that, I will turn it over to Caitlin.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair and council members. Again, my name is Caitlin Sweeney. I'm the director of the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and I thank you so much for the invitation to present on the Estuary Blueprint today. I'll start today with just a brief background on the San Francisco Estuary Partnership for those of you who are not as familiar with us. And then I'll talk in more detail about our Estuary Blueprint and the update process. And I know you're running a bit behind, so I'll definitely skip some slides in an effort to shorten my presentation. Next slide, please. So the San Francisco Estuary Partnership is a place-based, non-regulatory program of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We are one of 28 members of the National Estuary Program, which was established by Congress in 1988 to protect and restore estuaries of national significance. The National Estuary Program model focuses on local partnership, collaboration, and consensus building. So we leverage federal, state, and local resources to support projects and programs to protect and enhance and restore the estuary system, working with a large suite of diverse partners to do so. US EPA provides program approval and a small amount of base funding, but we secure additional millions of dollars of funding each year for projects and programs that benefit the estuary, the vast majority of which is passed through to local partners for on-the-ground implementation projects. All national estuary programs are required to have a local administrative and fiscal home, which for us has been the Association of Bay Area Governments since our founding in the late 1980s. And then with the recent consolidation of staff of ABAG and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, we are now actually part of the broader ABAG MTC family. So we are also guided by our 38-member implementation committee, which includes the Delta Stewardship Council and Delta Conservancy, as well as many other local, state, and federal agencies, businesses, scientific research, and citizen advocacy organizations. And again, many thanks to Amanda Bull, who's currently serving as our vice chair of the implementation committee, as she said. Next slide, please. Our planning area covers the watersheds that drain to the estuary, including both the Bay or lower estuary and the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta or upper estuary to the legal Delta boundary. Though certainly recognizing the connection to and influence of policies and plans in the headwaters and the major tributaries. We really look at the Bay and Delta as one interconnected ecological system and work to incorporate that holistic view whenever possible. Next slide. The Estuary Blueprint, excuse me, is a non-regulatory regional planning document required by the Clean Water Act, with the technical US EPA name of Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, also a mouthful. Ours was first completed in 1993, and it really served as the first collaborative plan for the entire estuary, developed by over 100 stakeholder groups, many of whom had really never sat down at the table together to agree on priorities. It's been updated twice since then, once in 2007 as an update of the existing document. And then in 2016, we did a major revision of the document, and that's when we renamed it the shorter, more catchier Estuary Blueprint. So today, the current plan identifies priority actions agreed upon by over 80 organizations, and it really serves to elevate those highest priority actions for support and potential funding and project development and implementation. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the plan was last majorly revised in 2016, and I'll just talk briefly about our 2016 Estuary Blueprint now. Next. So in our most recent update in 2016, we asked ourselves and of all of our partners, where do we want to be in 2050 in terms of estuary health? And then importantly, what can we do over the next 5 years to get there? Where can we move the needle? Next, please. The Estuary Blueprint has 4 goals or focus areas, broadly reflected here in the 4 orange circles. But the real work, to be honest, happens at the action level. We have 32 actions that bridge across these focus areas, and within each action is 1 or more tasks to implement that action. Next slide, please. And let's go ahead and skip this and go to the next slide. Thank you. So now we're in the midst of updating our 2016 Estuary Blueprint for the next 5 years. Next, please. And go 1 more, please. So for this update, we have developed these guiding principles to help focus our efforts. Some of these have been carried through from previous updates. As with past versions, our aim is to remain aspirational yet feasible. We hope that on this update to expand and deepen multi-sectoral engagement. So reaching new stakeholder groups, bringing new partners on board with updating and implementing the blueprint. Continue integrating the many different plans that now abound in our region, as well as bridging historic socio-political divides between the Bay and Delta, since of course they are both part of one ecological system. And this is really one element that sets us apart from most other regional planning efforts on both the Bay and the Delta sides. And to this end, we're drawing from, aligning with, supporting, and advancing Plan Bay Area, which you just heard about, as well as the Delta Plan, among others. We also really want to elevate equity and bring human dimensions forward in this update. And of course, we can always improve the clarity of roles and the responsibilities of the many involved partners. Next, please. So I'll give a brief overview here of the few of the ways in which we are prioritizing climate resilience in this update. So we're identifying ways to protect natural resources such as estuarine habitats and wildlife as an integral part of any planning effort to increase the resilience of shoreline communities at risk from flooding and rising seas. We are prioritizing the improvement of and update to regulatory processes to facilitate innovative multi-benefit climate adaptation projects, such as new approaches to integrated flood management, shoreline alteration, sediment disposal, habitat restoration. We're working with partners to really accelerate natural nature-based adaptation projects. We're identifying the barriers to increasing our water use efficiency indoors and out. And we're advancing tools to support municipalities with implementing green infrastructure and low impact development on city streets for better stormwater management, flood control, water quality, et cetera. And we're incorporating, supporting, and advancing the work of our partners in this realm, including drawing from the excellent work of the Delta Adapts Initiative. And we're doing all of this with a sense of real urgency as we see the impacts of climate change and sea level rise escalating throughout our region and beyond, and particularly in our underserved and our frontline communities who are already at greater risk due to location or lack of resources. And to that point, we're elevating, again, equity and human dimensions in this update and seeking ways to engage with communities to ensure their input and leadership in the years to come. Next. I don't have the time to go through all 32 actions, nor would you wish me to, but I just wanted to highlight an action from the 2016 update to give an example of how we're building on previous successes. This action on carbon sequestration is one of the Blueprint's previous success stories through the completion of the Delta Conservancy's carbon offset methodology. And we're looking to the next steps for this action. And in doing so, we're looking towards advancing project implementation in the Delta and the ways that projects can stack benefits, particularly economic benefits with environmental benefits. On the bay side, carbon cycling isn't as well understood. So a task might be to develop to advance the understanding of carbon cycling in the bay's tidal wetlands. So again, an example of how we're reviewing our previous blueprint and building on past successes for this next version. Next, please. Here's the timeline for our update process. We kicked off this process as the pandemic was getting underway. So we held our first steering committee meeting last July. We have established staff-led working groups for the actions, and we're currently developing draft updated actions. This is a great time for you to share your thoughts on priorities, and your involvement is always welcome. We hope to have the update released in the first half of next year after going through our approval process with our implementation committee, our higher level executive council, and the EPA. Next slide, please. So if you have general questions or want to get more involved, please feel free to contact me directly. My information is here or on our website. Next slide, please. And then before I sign up, I do want to encourage you to attend our State of the Estuary Summit. Thank you so much to Dr. Larson for covering the summit in her report. As she stated, this year's conference, traditionally a biennial 3-day in-person conference, will now be a 1-day virtual, entirely free summit on October 1st. And in addition to Amanda Bowl and Dr. Larson's engagement in the summit, we'll also have a presentation from Council Staff Harriet Ross with colleagues from Restore the Delta. So more information is on our website at sfestuary.org, and we really hope you can join us. Thank you so much.
Any wrap up, Amanda?
No, I just thank you again to Caitlin for being here. Our staff has been, trying to assist and again, looking at the Delta plan and these two documents as being very much sister documents. And so our staff has been engaged in the update process and plan to continue to be doing so. And I'm happy to share the final blueprint when it comes out in the first half of next year.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Caitlin. This great presentation and as usual, great work.
Thank you so much.
So council members, any questions for Amanda or Caitlin? Any public comment on this item?
There is not.
Well, in that case, thank you again to you both. And we'll move on to agenda item 12. For agenda item 12, I will be leaving the meeting since I am recused from the council's regulatory and potential adjudicative roles with regard to the Delta Conveyance project. So I'll hand things off to Judge Damrell. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you all next month.
Thank you, Chair Tatoyan. We will now move to agenda item 12, Delta Conveyance Update. Jessica, would you please introduce your guests to us?
Sure. Thank you, Judge. Today, as part of a regular series of updates, staff from the Department of Water Resources and the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority are here to provide an update on continued efforts for the Delta Conveyance project. Carrie Buckman from DWR will provide an update on the project's environmental planning, including efforts to develop a community benefits program framework, outreach efforts, and also preliminary operational criteria for the project. Graham Bradner from the DCA will summarize project conceptual design revisions that have been made in response to feedback from the environmental process and recent community engineering briefings. So with that, I'd like to invite Carrie Buckman and Graham Bradner over to the presenter's side and let them take it from here.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you, council members, for having us. We really appreciate being here today. I do have some slides. Should I pull those up or is Brandon doing that?
I can put it up. I just wasn't sure who was going
Okay.
first. So 1 second.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to provide an update on the status of the environmental planning, and then I'll hand it over to Graham to provide an update on the conceptual design process. So I think we can move to the next slide. So a couple of quick updates before I launch into a few more details. Starting with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, we are proceeding with the technical studies and impact analysis that will feed the EIR. We're working on a lot of different technical analyses that will help us assess whether there is the potential for significant environmental impacts and whether we are looking for mitigation measures to reduce or avoid those impacts. And that work is in progress towards a draft EIR in mid-2022. Concurrently, the United States Army Corps of Engineers is working on compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. They are working to develop an environmental impact statement on a similar schedule to what we are working on for the EIR. It will be a separate document, but we are working to have an overlapping public review period in mid-2022. Also, we've completed an initial study in mitigated negative declaration on soil investigations. At this point, I think about 1.5 years ago. And so field work has been underway for those projects. There was a short break in July and August, but it has resumed. It resumed this week, actually. And if people are interested, there is a 2-week look ahead map that we continue to update every week. It's available online, and I've included the link in my presentation. Additionally, when I was here last, we talked about the environmental justice survey results. And we have published the report since then, and it is available online, and I've included the link here as well. We have had requests to make the data available. A lot of the data is personal identifiable information, and so we are working to try to remove that information and share the information that will not be personally identifiable, so that process is underway. And then I wanted to also mention that over the last several months, we've been having a series of technical webinars to help discuss background and analytical methods. We understand that a lot of the information in the EIR is difficult to understand and very technical in nature. And so we set up these webinars as a way to try to help people understand some background information to be ready for the review of the EIR next year. So the 4 webinars, we had a webinar on SWP operations and how the Delta Conveyance project would fit into those operations, fisheries, climate change, and environmental justice. And if people were unable to make the meetings but are interested, we have posted the videos in both English and Spanish on our website. The last webinar was just last week, so the video isn't quite up yet, but it will be soon. Next slide, please. So as an overview of our schedule, I think I probably show this most times I'm here, so sorry for the repetition, but I know everyone's always very interested. So just a quick review. We are working on the EIR and EIS to publish in mid-2022 with a public review period. Then we will address public comments, finalize the documents, and work on decision documents in late 2023. We are concurrently working on compliance for the Endangered Species Act and California Endangered Species Act. We're planning to submit a biological assessment and incidental take permit application around the same time as we have the public draft documents available for review. And then the agencies will work on biological opinions and incidental take permits. For the next three items, water rights, delta plan consistency, and other environmental permits, because those are further out, we haven't sort of put together the detailed schedules for those as much, but I did want to highlight, because I know it's always a concern here, that we are planning to submit our certification of consistency for the Delta Plan after the change in point of diversion for water rights is complete. So that will be 2024. This period of 2023 and 2024 reflects sort of our work preparing materials and not the submittal and hearing process. Next slide, please. So last time I was here, we talked about the community benefits program, and I wanted to give an update on where we are on the development of the program. So we've had a series of public meetings where we've collected information as well as a number of interviews. And so generally, just to talk about the concept of the community benefits program, it is a defined set of commitments made by project proponents and created in coordination with the local community to create lasting, tangible, and potentially significant economic and social benefit to the residents, businesses, and organizations facing project impacts. Next slide, please. And this community benefits program is part of one of three efforts that will help address impacts. So the first is regulatory mitigation. So this is specifically to address project impacts related to specific regulatory requirements. And these will be sort of the base upon which we work, but we also recognize that CEQA and NEPA are fairly prescriptive. They may not cover all of the types of effects that could be felt by local communities. And that's part of the reason we're considering this community benefits program, which would be in addition to what's required under regulatory mitigation. So the purpose is to provide resources to direct benefits towards the communities that are most affected by implementation. And the ideas are based on community collaboration. Third, we have an ombudsman program. And this would be a clearinghouse with a single point of contact to streamline information, support, and claims. And the idea is to ensure that there is just compensation as a result of any direct construction impacts. Next slide, please. So as a result of the discussions with the communities, both through the interviews and the workshops, we're looking at two pieces right now of the community benefits program. The first is a Delta Community Fund, which would fund efforts that empower the local community to protect, enhance, and sustain the unique cultural, historical, recreational, agricultural, and economic values of the Delta as an evolving place. And the second piece is economic development and integrated benefits. So that could include targeted hiring, business participation programs, job training, and also integrated project benefits or leave behind. And an example could be a park and ride facility, or if we're bringing internet near a community, that internet could be available for local communities as well. And so the idea is that we're putting these ideas into a framework to describe the community benefits program, and that framework will be included in the draft EIR for public review. Next slide, please. So I did want to show some of the suggested funding ideas that we've heard during this process. I think we received quite a few ideas. We've grouped them into a number of categories. I know that it's certainly not really readable in this environment, but this information is available in the presentation. And I just wanted to highlight some of the areas that we heard frequently. So people were definitely interested in projects that could help water and air quality, public safety and emergency response, recreation, habitat conservation, culture and history. And then we have a second slide of these project ideas as well. Next slide, please. economy, infrastructure, agriculture, education and workforce development, and levee maintenance. So all of these ideas are being included in the community benefits framework for inclusion in the draft EIR. We don't know, the idea of a fund is that we don't really know which pieces of this would move forward. It would really depend on what the community sort of applies for funding for, but these are the types of things that people have expressed interest in that would be valuable to the local community. So the next steps, as I mentioned, we're working on developing the community benefits framework for inclusion in the EIR. And also people requested to learn more information about other similar community benefits programs. A community benefit program is fairly common on larger infrastructure projects. So we're trying to put together a case study workshop where we bring in participants in the development and implementation of other similar programs, and allow stakeholders to ask questions and really learn more about the lessons learned and how to think about applying them here. So we haven't been able to fully schedule that yet, but we're hoping we'll be able to do that in early November. If not, if we have trouble, we have to work with a lot of different calendars on this, so we may end up shifting to the early part of 2022, but we're really hoping we can do that this year. Next slide. So another topic I wanted to touch on today, during the technical webinars, we did provide some initial information on what we're thinking about operations, and I wanted to share that here as well. So, what we're doing now is we're starting the analysis of the project, and as such, we don't know where the operations may fully end up. What we're doing is we're putting together a set of operational criteria that we think will assist in protecting fish. And we're going to then use that set of criteria to analyze the project, understand what the effects could be. And then at that point, when we know what those effects are, we may continue to make revisions to try to be more protective, depending on the types of impacts that we see. So with that in mind, these are the ones that we are looking at now, but I do want to just highlight that this could change depending on the results of the evaluation. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. There we go. Some of the Zoom pieces are coming up in front of my slide for me. Okay, so the proposed North Delta diversion intakes would operate in conjunction with the existing South Delta intakes in a system we call dual conveyance. And that means that we as DWR would have the flexibility to use either the south or north intakes. And so we're trying to figure out, we want to model the scenario that we think is the most likely. And so we've sort of worked through this with our operations team. And so what we're modeling is that in the winter and spring, we would use the North Delta diversion to augment diversions on top of what's permitted at the South Delta. So basically, during periods of high flow, the North Delta diversion would be used to withdraw a piece of that flow in addition to what's being diverted in the South Delta. And then in the summer and fall, the North Delta diversion would be used instead of the South Delta diversion to help manage salinity and realize potential carriage water savings. And we're hoping that this approach will maximize the benefits of the project while minimizing impacts. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about the operational criteria for the new intakes. I did want to highlight that we are assuming that existing operational criteria, including the 2020 incidental take permit for long-term operations of the State Water Project, as well as D1641 continue, and those criteria would need to be met. A couple of things that are specific that we want to make sure we're meeting as part of a new project are that we would continue to meet Delta outflow requirements. With the new North Delta diversion, we would still meet the export inflow ratio computation calculations from D1641, and the new North Delta diversion would be part of the exports in that calculation. So it would be sort of the exports total South Delta and North Delta divided by the inflow. We also need to make sure North Delta diversions don't affect the ability to meet Old and Middle River requirements or export limits. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the specific criteria that we're considering. So we have a number of components that we're including as part of our operational criteria. The first are fish screen approach and sweeping velocity criteria. And so fish screen approach velocity is the velocity that water is going into the screen, and sweeping velocity is the velocity that it's going past the screen. And so for both of those, we're using criteria from the fishery agencies. And the idea is that those criteria will help minimize near field effects near the fish screen. Additionally, we're identifying bypass flow criteria. And the idea is that depending on the flow in the river, we would specify an amount of flow that must bypass the facility and stay in the Sacramento River downstream of the proposed intakes. And the idea from this bypass flow requirement is that when flows are very low, below about 5,000 CFS, the project could not divert any water. And then above that, there would be a very slow ramping up of the diversion until flows are higher. And one of the things that's really important to note here is that I think people often look at the project and think, well, there's a 6,000 CFS diversion capacity. Sort of once the project is built, the gates would open, and that's how much should be going through the tunnel. And really, the bypass flow criteria limit it much more than that to be only a small portion of that 6,000 CFS, unless flows are much higher. In addition to bypass flow requirements, we're also including pulse protection to protect when fish are migrating past the fish screens, and there would be a pulse of those fish. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in my next slide. And then the last is that we've identified low-level pumping, so a diversion level that would have minimal effects within the delta. And so, as I mentioned, when flows are below 5,000 CFS, there would be no diversions. But then for an amount above 5,000 CFS, the only diversions that could take place would be these low-level diversions of 900 CFS. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this gives us a little bit of an idea about our conceptual model of fish migration past the intakes. So, our understanding is that as juvenile fish are migrating out of the water system towards the delta, they're typically migrating in pulses. So there are triggers that cause the fish to move downstream. And so there are times when there are more fish present and times when there are less, as shown in this figure. And so we've developed our concept of protections to accommodate that conceptual model, that we would always have the bypass flow requirement for those fish that are there. But during a pulse of fish, we have an additional pulse protection with lower flow to help protect those fish. And then as shown on the bottom, we would always have approach and sweeping velocity criteria. So I think move to the next slide. Just typically, I like to put this on here. Please, if people are interested in more information, the best way to stay informed is on our website. We have an e-blast sign up, and you can sign up, and we send out emails on a periodic basis to provide more information. And with that, I think turn it over to Graham. Thank you.
Does anyone, any members have a question for Carrie at this time?
No, good information.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, should I go ahead and start sharing?
Yeah, go ahead and start, please.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, my apologies, 1 second. It looks like it went to the wrong screen. One second. Sorry about that. It went to the wrong screen. Let me move it over. Dang it. Sorry, I know it's getting late, everyone. I'm sorry to drag you through this.
And Graham, I have a copy too if you need me to share it.
Okay, let me try one more time, and if it doesn't work, then we'll just go.
Okay.
So do you see the presented version, or do you just see the the base version?
We see it in PowerPoint. It's not full screen.
Okay, would you mind sharing yours?
Yeah, sure.
Stop. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, excellent. Sorry for the delay, everyone. Let me just get moving here. So, all right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to provide the council this update on the DCA's activities regarding the Delta Conveyance project. If you would go to the next slide, please. So I've got two topics to review with you today. The first being a review of recent design changes that have been made to the conceptual design based on feedback from the ongoing environmental review and analysis. And then the second item would be a summary of ongoing outreach efforts being led by the DCA. So next slide, please. So the DCA has previously presented to this council to provide overviews of the conceptual designs associated with the central and eastern corridors, and then more recently, the Bethany Reservoir alternative. The most recent Bethany presentation was back in January. The figure on the right side shows an overall summary of the three alternatives, just for reference, for a 6,000 CFS flow option. So there's the central corridor. They're kind of running through the central delta, the eastern corridor hugging the eastern margins of the delta, and then converging at the same location down next to Clifton Court. And then there's the Bethany Reservoir alternative, which would follow the eastern corridor down to around Lower Roberts Island, and then follow the yellow path to a different location to feed directly into Bethany Reservoir. The facilities on the top, the two intakes that are shown, the Twin Cities launch shaft, those would be common to all three potential alternatives. So what I want to cover with you today is a summary of more recent design changes. While the bulk of the conceptual design effort has really been done and is the basis for the environmental analyses that are being performed now, we still have been executing a series of updates based on feedback from the environmental team. Now, the changes I'm going to review with you have been incorporated into the conceptual designs that are now being evaluated through CEQA. So sort of moving from north to south, the blue circles on the right show where the sites are located that we're going to review. The first being the one on the north, the Twin Cities launch shaft, and the change is a realignment of the ring levee that surrounds that construction area. The next three changes 2, 3, and 4, relate to activities down at the Southern Forebay and Southern Complex down there at Clifton Court. So it's a very large facility, and there's a series of changes that we'll talk about related to the power supply, the road and rail, that's really logistical access and support for construction, and then changes to the overall footprint of the Southern Forebay. And then the last item 5 there, is related to the Bethany Reservoir alternative, and it's the little blue circle on the very bottom of the screen shows the location of that. It's realignment of the access road that would potentially be constructed for accessing the discharge structure up at Bethany Reservoir. Next slide, please. So first, to talk about the realignment of the ring levee at the Twin Cities complex, and all of these examples are going to follow the same sequence. I'll first show you a slide of the original proposed configuration. So this is what we were maybe working on or had developed a year ago or sometime around that time frame through the conceptual design process. And then more recently will be the second slide. I'll show you how we've tweaked and revised that based on feedback from the environmental team. So first, the originally proposed configuration of the Twin Cities ring levee was to have a ring levee that would fully surround the construction area and protect all of the interior operations through passive protection. We had it configured to tie into the earth ramp that supports the bridge that leads over I-5. There's an earth ramp for Dearson Road, and so that ring levee would tie into Dearson Road to make a complete perimeter. And the configuration is laid out intended to provide space for up to 2 tunneling contractors that would be potentially associated with a north tunnel versus a south tunnel. They could be different. So you can see the sites are sort of shifted as there's a north site and then a south site, north and south of Dearson Road. Just for reference, the upper image is for central and eastern corridors. The lower right image is for the Bethany Reservoir alternative. They have a bit of a different footprint just because of the different requirements of these different alternatives. But in general, the activities are very similar. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask Graham before you leave that slide? Graham, what's the acreage dedicated for both sites? This is
so sure, council member. It's on the order of about 500 acres for central and eastern, and then for the Bethany Reservoir alternative, it's closer to 600 acres.
Okay, So about 1,100 acres combined.
Well, they would never be combined, right? It'd be one or the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or did. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next slide, please. So the revised configuration is to remove the connection to the Dearson Road ramp. So you can see the dashed line there represents the original limits, and then the solid line represents the revised limits. This was based on hydraulic analyses of overland flooding in the area. Glanville Tract, as many of you I'm sure are aware, has a history of flooding, and there are flood issues in the region. And so we've done quite a bit of work looking at this particular site, trying to understand how floodwaters move around the area. What we found was that by removing that connection to the Dearson Road ramp, and then providing more space between I-5 and the toe of the ring levee, and that's really more particular to the image on the lower right, the Bethany alternative, that provides enough space to allow shallow overland flows to continue to move around the site in the way that they have historically, generally in a southwesterly direction, tending to flow in from the north, moving across the site to the south, and then accessing the culverts that flow under I-5 to push that water back over to the western side of Glanville Tract. So by making these revisions, we're able to preserve the natural flow of shallow floodwater as it's occurred in the past. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move down to the southern complex and go through a series of changes associated with that facility. The first being changes to the southern complex power supply. The original plan included power connections to both PG&E and WAPA. The PG&E connections would be up in Byron. So you can see the new corridor line there that's in orange extending up the northwest portion of the figure towards Byron. That's really the part that you're going to see the change on. So if you go to the next slide, please. So with the revised plan, the alignment would reflect only a WAPA connection as the power provider for the facilities in the South Delta. In doing that, we're able to remove about 7 miles of previously proposed new power lines that would be required to connect to the existing PG&E facilities. It eliminates the vast majority of the urban and rural residential footprint that would have been impacted, and then eliminates most of the new corridor associated with power lines. Next slide. So next is, again, the southern forebay, southern complex area, change associated with realigning the southern complex road and rail to avoid alkali wetlands. So the alkali wetlands are you can see them shaded in purple, kind of in the center of the image there. And then the originally proposed rail came off of Byron Highway, curved into the site right through those wetland areas. And then the road itself was a separate connection associated with the traffic circle off of Byron Highway. So next slide, please. Based on review of these wetland sites and extents, we made a revision to the alignments to create a common curve rail and road. So we've tucked both the rail and road entrances to the site into one corridor that crosses over the culverts there and avoids the impacts associated with the sensitive wetland areas. In doing so, we also had to relocate the tunnel liner segment storage areas, rail spurs, first aid heliport, emergency response facilities, as well as contractor staging. But in moving these items around, we were able to reconfigure the road and rail alignment and avoid or significantly reduce the effects on the sensitive wetlands. Next slide, please. So the last change on the southern forebay area is just changes to the overall footprint. The originally proposed configuration included space that was flagged temporary space to stage topsoil in the northeast corner. And so you can see that sort of triangular shaped area just on the northeast side of the southern forebay. Then there was an area of permanent peat stockpile directly between the eastern edge of the forebay and Italian Slough. So you see that it's called out as peat storage. And then a permanent RTM stockpile that's reusable tunnel material stockpile on the north side of the southern forebay for any leftover material that wasn't used for reconstruction of the basin. Next slide. So the revised configuration is based on updates to the soil balance. So we have done a total system-wide soil balance to try and make use of every bit of available material that we'll be generating within the project. And so the soil balance indicates that less remnant RTM will be stockpiled in the northern stockpile than was originally considered. And so in looking at that, we came up with a new configuration to use the northern stockpile for the permanent peat stockpile, which will be covered to limit oxidation. Also the temporary topsoil stockpile and the remnant RTM stockpile, all that can be consolidated in the area on the north side of the basin. So we're able to remove the temporary footprint that was in the northeastern corner, as well as the permanent RTM stockpile or the permanent peat stockpile located closer to Italian Slough. This reduced the temporary footprint in the order of 250 acres and the permanent footprint by about 150 acres. Next slide, please. This is the last revision that I've got to review with you today. This is regarding now the Bethany Reservoir alternative. So you see Bethany Reservoir there in the upper left-hand corner of the image. The original plan was a haul route would be needed. It would have to be constructed to get access to the rim of Bethany Reservoir for construction of the discharge structure. And so the original plan was to follow an existing road that comes in off of Mountain House Road. It would require widening for two-way construction traffic and some pretty significant road cuts to accommodate the appropriate road grade for all the construction equipment. There's a pretty significant hill. If you look at that, the image there, once you cross through what's now flagged as the wetland areas, there's a pretty steep hill up there that would require quite a bit of construction activity to get the right grades for the heavy haulers. And the road construction would have significant effects on the existing sensitive wetland area. Next slide. So we took another look at the route for the haul route and came up with an alternative alignment. It's only about 0.1 miles longer, so it's not a heck of a lot longer by comparison. It exits off of Mountain House Road at a different location closer to the Central Valley Project canal system you can see there. But it completely avoids the sensitive wetland areas that were identified. And at the same time, we're able to instead route a path that follows more closely the natural topography, which really helped to minimize the road cuts, which would result in less visibility from a distance. The reduced excavation and earthwork associated with following that existing topography also results in quite a bit less material that have to be hauled off to various stockpiles and staged. So a whole lot less earthwork associated with this new route, while also being able to avoid the sensitive wetland areas. So next slide, please. So now we're going to just switch subjects slightly. We're going to now talk about ongoing outreach efforts with the DCA. And I realize this council is very aware of the Stakeholder Engagement Committee, which was formed by the DCA to provide community input on the development of conceptual designs, really with a focus on reducing local effects during construction and operations. The SEC has generally been focused on the engineering aspects of the project, but has also been briefed at times on DWR's progress in the environmental analysis. We've had a total of 18 meetings, which began almost 2 years ago. There's been a tremendous amount of input provided by the SEC, and we've made many adjustments to the conceptual designs as a result of that input. We actually just had a meeting last night, an SEC meeting last night, and it was discussed that we think it's time and it makes sense that the next meeting in December should be the last meeting of the SEC, at least in its current form. As you heard from Carrie's update, the public draft of the EIR is expected in the coming year in 2022, and the focus is currently on completing the impact analyses for CEQA. The DCA is generally done making modifications to the conceptual designs for the various projects being analyzed in the EIR. We've just seen several examples of the type of more recent design changes that we've been making in response to environmental analysis feedback. It's always been intended that the SEC would wind down once the conceptual design phase was completed, and we've reached that point. Going forward, there really won't be engineering content for the SEC to opine and provide feedback, but there certainly will be an abundance of opportunities for stakeholders to be involved through the CEQA process, but also through other committees or bodies that may be formed by the DCA in the future. I also want to reiterate that it will ultimately be the DCA board of directors that makes the final decision on where the SEC goes from here. So now I want to highlight a few other ways in which we continue to expand our outreach and make current engineering information about the conceptual projects available to the public. So first, I'll start with the virtual tours. So these are available through our website. These provide a very good, I think, overview of the project and all the alignments. And we've actually expanded those now to include additional languages of Spanish and Cantonese in addition to English. Again, trying to improve accessibility. Next slide, please. We have a project in place now, library distribution of materials to local libraries. We have actually identified 20 Delta area libraries that have been provided with updated map books, flash drives, with videos and print materials from DWR and DCA for reference and use. The intention is to provide a one-stop shop for all these types of materials for those who have trouble accessing computers or internet connections. We do understand and hear a lot about internet challenges in the Delta and want to make the materials totally available to the public and are going through this exercise to make these materials available there locally. Next slide, please. And then we've also been holding a series of community engineering briefings, the most recent ones being with RD 1002. This was a few weeks ago at RD 1002, and then also maybe a week or two ago with the community of Point Pleasant. We've had previous meetings with the community of Hood. These are all intended to bring the engineering and design teams to these meetings and discuss specific community issues around the facilities, really focusing on the folks who are neighbors of this, this project layout or potential project and have very specific concerns or feedback that they'd like to provide, but to also, this is a great opportunity for us to share up-to-date and accurate information and get that community feedback. We're happy to do this. We understand that these briefings likely aren't changing the hearts and minds of the community, but we feel that it's exceedingly important that folks are getting accurate information on the conceptual engineering of the project. And I think from that perspective, they have been, a successful endeavor, and we're going to continue to push to do that and meet with folks who live and work local to the project area. These are meetings that are available upon request, and we're currently pursuing additional meetings with additional communities in the local area. So that completes my presentation, and we'll pause at this point for questions.
Chair. Member Natoli. Graham, I just had on the community engineering briefings. I don't know how the arrangements are made and so forth, but I would certainly on behalf of the commission and Delta Protection Commission, but also as a representative of the areas, at least where we've had some of these meetings recently, would appreciate advance notice if that's possible, but certainly through the commission staff at a minimum. I think our executive director and staff there is very important. Again, to your point, maybe not changing hearts and minds, but you are local communities and that feedback is important. I think certainly from the standpoint of what you're tasked with, but I think it's important for other local representatives to be aware of those briefings if possible. So I would ask if you could accommodate that.
Okay, very good. Understood.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So, Graham, can I just say, so will you keep the commission in connected in this then?
Yeah, you're right that each of these is organized a little differently, and it generally comes sort of as a grassroots. Somebody reaches out to us and says, we're an organization, we feel like we don't understand, or and so they sort of they form organically that way. But it's certainly something that we could reach out to and notify other entities. We are generally in favor of keeping them relatively small, and so I think it provides an opportunity for folks who really have an on-the-ground sense of, have an on-the-ground concern because they either own property, they farm there, they ranch there, and we want to get there, and we owe them the opportunity to hear the specifics of the program and what it may entail. I think, but as you're requesting, I think it would make sense at times to also involve, at least notify the Delta Protection Commission. So,
well, and I'll just give you a real quick example. I was at a meeting the week before folks were down there when Julie gave her presentation the following week in Point Pleasant with the community for several hours in the evening, talking about flood protection in the area. And it came to my attention that there was this meeting flyer was circulated and so forth. And again, I think it's, you know, it's worthwhile, and it's important that you meet with local folks around issues and certainly bring current information. But that's the type of things that I think is important, certainly from the standpoint of good communication. And I know, again, you continue to work on that. But I just think through the commission, there's a good network there. And that way it's, you know, you can certainly keep the local focus to it, but I think also make sure there's a general awareness of, you know, the ongoing activities. And I think it's important from the standpoint of the commission. So I appreciate your response and trust it'll be addressed. Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Are there any public comments?
There are. We have Deidre Desjardins.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about disclosure of the new sea level rise analysis for the intakes. And the reason is, as you know, since those intakes were originally studied, estimates of maximum sea level rise in the Delta have doubled from 3 meters. I'm sorry, from 1 meter to 2 meters. Not only that, but current studies are showing that the ensemble of models is under predicting sea level rise. So I'm very concerned that not only is there no public analysis of this project as an adaptation to sea level rise, the community also isn't getting information about sea level rise adaptation and the tunnel as an adaptation to it. And I know there's been a lot of pushback saying the tunnel isn't necessary, and the community just hasn't even gotten your analysis to look at it. Thank you.
Any other public comments?
There are. We have Matt Conover.
Hi, I'm in RD 1002, and you held one of those meetings on our lawn here. And I wanted to find out if what I heard you say was accurately perceived, that your revised effort now will displace water back across the freeway into RD 1002.
So Matt, nice to hear from you again. Yeah, you're right. We did meet just a couple of weeks ago. So Matt, the descriptions and changes that I provided regarding the ring levee was not to displace floodwaters. It's just to allow the floodwaters to move as they historically have. The original configuration blocked that movement by tying into the road ramp at Dearson Road, and by pulling back and effectively, and especially pulling to the east where the ground is higher and in some cases dry during various events, it really helps to limit those effects and allow the waters to flow through and get to those existing culverts.
Okay, thank you. I also submitted at that time 40 questions, some of which you answered during the presentation, others of which staff said they'd be working on them and get back to us. I don't know how long that'll take, but wanted to let you know that we're still interested. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Any further public comments?
We do. Dan Whaley.
See.
Dan, you can unmute yourself.
There we go. Did I unmute myself there? Okay. I would just like to welcome the new members to the Delta Stewardship Council. And I just want that. My name is Dan Whaley. I live on Sutter Island. I have a business in the town of Hood, and I'm also part of the Delta Legacy Communities nonprofit that has members from each of the 11 Delta Legacy communities. And I just wanted to let the new Stewardship Council members understand that there is intense opposition to this project, and there is a reasonable basis for it. Currently, they are not using current modeling in their scientific analysis, both on the seismic and, as Deidre pointed out, on the sea level rise. Also, what they have failed to explain to you is why, after the Independent Science Review Board said this is not a project that can be reasonably constructed, you need to redesign it, the Department of Water Resources ignored that report and just thundered forward. What we would like to see is a cost benefit analysis. We are all taxpayers. This is a government organization, and it should run on an efficiency basis. Right now, Marin County is talking about buying portable desalination units because they want to supply the fresh water they need. There's no reason that we install this tunnel. It adds no water to the system, and it will destroy the delta. From a scientific aspect, that DWR and Kerry Buckman have said, we can't move these intakes because it's not feasible. Well, they've never defined what feasible is. If they put these intakes where they're located now, it will destroy the delta. And so as they go forward, they need to provide you with a reason why this project should even go before we get into the minutia of how to actually build the project. Thank you for your time. That's all I have.
Are there any other public comments?
There are. We also have someone, it just says Al. So sorry for the introduction. Al has their hand raised. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My last name is Netterhood. I'm from Orange County, but I was wondering for Graham, with the changes that were outlined, was there any dollar figure that was assigned to those? I would assume it would increase the cost. So what did the dollars look like as far as those changes? Thank you.
So Al, we don't have a dollar amount associated with these changes. These are, as you know, right now, there hasn't been a recommended or selected project. And so at this point, those are changes to the concept that's being evaluated through the EIR. I think that's the best answer I can give right now.
Any further public comments?
No, that's it.
And there are no other public comments?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you not hear me? No, that's all, Judge.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for your time, Carrie and Graham. This concludes our the public comment period. Our next meeting will be October 28 and 29 via Zoom. Thank you all for the meeting, and the meeting is now adjourned.
Hey, Mr. Chair, before you adjourn, just I'm sorry, Judge. I just wanted to ask, maybe for the October meeting, if we could ask Jessica or staff to maybe give us an update. There was recent legislation that affected CEQA and exemptions for potential exemptions for habitat restoration projects from CEQA. And I guess I was curious, I think there's some interest in the community about how that might or might not affect certainly this council's statutory authority relative to consistency findings and what we depend upon for a lot of cases, information as it relates to CEQA. I don't know if it has any net effect on the Delta or not, but I just, again, without any speculation, I think it might be helpful for us to have an update if that's appropriate. So I didn't want to ask you that before we adjourned. So.
Okay, well, I'll pass it on to the chair.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? All right, thank you all. The meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.